Imagine a great river flowing through the desert at dusk. Picture it, a broad ribbon of dark water, moving slowly and without hurry, as it has moved for 1,000,000 years between banks of black, fertile earth. On either side of that narrow green world, the desert rises, vast, silent, golden red in the last light of the sun, stretching away to the ends of the earth. Palm trees stand along the water, utterly still in the windless evening. A heron lifts from the reeds and crosses the river on slow wings, and on the western bank, where the sun is sinking in a blaze of copper and rose, the land of the dead begins, for in this country, the west has always belonged to the departed, and every sunset is a door. See the temples rising along the river, pylons of golden stone, courts of mighty columns carved with gods and kings, walls alive with painted figures that have kept their colors for 3,000 years. See the pyramids far to the north, ancient already in ancient times, their sides catching the last of the light. Smell the faint sweetness of lotus on the water and the dust of the desert cooling after the heat of the day. Somewhere a priest is chanting the evening hymn, and the sound drifts across the water and dissolves into the enormous silence of the sands. This is Egypt, Kemet, the Black Land, the gift of the river. And this is the world that dreamed one of the richest, strangest, and most beautiful mythologies humankind has ever known. For 3,000 years and more, the people of this river valley told stories about their gods. About Ra, who sails the sky in a boat of gold and battles a serpent of chaos in the darkness beneath the world every single night. About Osiris, the good king who was murdered and dismembered and made whole again, who died and rose and became the lord of the dead. About Isis, the great enchantress, whose love was stronger than death. About Horus and Set and their long war for the throne of the world. About Anubis, the jackal of the tombs. About Thoth, who wrote down the wisdom of the universe. About the weighing of the heart and the journey through the underworld, and the field of reeds where the blessed dead live forever beside a heavenly river. Tonight, we will wander through the whole of that mythology, the entire story of the gods of Egypt, from the first mound of creation rising out of the dark waters, to the last temples falling silent. We will watch the world be born from the primeval ocean, and meet the great gods one by one, the sun and the sky, the earth and the stars, the makers and the destroyers. We will follow the sun god on his eternal voyage, through the day sky and the night world beneath. We will live through the great drama at the heart of it all, the murder of Osiris, the grief and cunning of Isis, the vengeance of Horus, and we will follow the dead themselves on their long journey through the duat, past gates and guardians, to the hall of judgment where every human heart is weighed against a feather. We will meet the pharaohs who called themselves sons of the sun, the priests who kept the temples, the magicians and their spells, the sacred animals, the festivals on the river, and we will follow the old religion through its slow twilight, into the strange afterlife of rediscovery, when the world learnt to read the old writing again, and the gods of Egypt woke into human memory once more. Before we set out on the river, a quiet word. If these long journeys into the past bring you something, some calm, some wonder, some company in the late hours, you might take a moment to leave a like, and to follow along with the channel, but only if these stories are truly yours. It is a small thing, and it helps other travelers in the dark find their way to this fire. And if you feel like it, leave a word below to say where you are listening from tonight, your city, and the hour it is where you are. There is a quiet pleasure in knowing that someone far away, in another city and another hour of the night, is drifting down the same dark river, listening to the same old story. But there is nothing you must do. The only thing that matters now is the river, and the stars coming out above the desert, and the tale that is about to begin. So come aboard. The boat is waiting at the water's edge, and the west is turning from copper to deep blue, and the first stars are out over the black land. Let us push off from the shore, and drift northward with the slow current, back, far back, to the very beginning of the world, before the river, before the land, before the gods themselves, back to the time when there was nothing at all but a dark and endless sea. Before the beginning, before the first mound rises from the waters, let us pause for a moment on a quiet and remarkable question. How do we know any of this? How do the myths of Egypt, told and written across 3,000 years, and then silenced for nearly 2,000 more, come down to us at all? The answer is itself a story worth telling, for Egyptian mythology reaches us along a road stranger and more wonderful than almost any other body of ancient story. The Egyptians were among the very first peoples on earth to write, and they wrote their religion everywhere. They carved it into the walls of tombs and temples in hieroglyphs, the beautiful picture writing they called the words of the gods, and they painted it on coffins and wrote it in flowing script on scrolls of papyrus, the paper they made from the reeds of the river. The oldest religious writings in the world come from Egypt. The so-called pyramid texts, spells and hymns carved inside the pyramids of kings more than 4,000 years ago, meant to carry the dead king safely into the sky. From later ages come the coffin texts, painted inside the coffins of ordinary people, and later still the famous scrolls that we call the Book of the Dead. The Egyptians themselves called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Collections of spells, prayers, and maps of the world beyond, placed in the tomb beside the dead, to guide them through the perils of the underworld, to the field of the blessed. And beyond these books of the dead, the myths lived on temple walls, where the daily rituals and great festivals were carved in stone. In hymns to the gods, some of them among the most beautiful religious poetry ever written, in stories told for pleasure and copied by schoolboys, tales of gods who quarrel and scheme, and are wounded and healed like anyone else, in magical spells that worked by telling a myth. For in Egypt, to speak of the time when Isis healed the child Horus was itself a medicine, and the story was the spell. Myth in Egypt was not gathered into one great book, one Bible or epic. It was everywhere and nowhere, scattered across tomb walls and papyri and temple carvings, told in fragments and allusions, shifting from city to city and age to age, alive and fluid, and never fixed in a single authorized form. This is one of the great secrets of Egyptian mythology, and it is worth carrying with us on our journey tonight. The Egyptians were untroubled by what we would call contradiction. In one telling the world is created by Atum, rising from the waters, in another, by Ptah, who thinks the world in his heart and speaks it with his tongue, in another, by 8 strange gods of the primordial dark, and in Thebes it is Ammon, the hidden one, who is the maker of all. The sky is a goddess arched over the earth. The sky is also a cow. The sky is also a river on which the sun sails. The sun is a falcon, a scarab beetle, a child, an old man, a disk of gold. The Egyptians held all these images at once, gently and without anxiety, the way one holds the many moods of a beloved landscape. Each image was a window onto a mystery too large for any single window. If we come to their myths asking, but which version is true? We are asking a question they would not have understood. All of them were true. Each was a way of seeing, and then, for a long age, the windows went dark. The old religion faded as new faiths rose. The last temples closed some 15 centuries ago, and the knowledge of hieroglyphs, the words of the gods, was utterly lost. For nearly 2,000 years, no human being on earth could read the writing that covered the monuments of Egypt. The tombs and temples stood in the desert, covered in stories no one could hear, a whole mythology sealed inside a forgotten script. The gods of Egypt slept. Their awakening is one of the great adventures of the human mind. When a stone was found in the delta town of Rosetta, bearing the same decree in hieroglyphs, in a later Egyptian script, and in Greek, scholars at last had a key. And in the early 19th century, after years of labour, the young French scholar Champollion cracked the code and the words of the gods began to speak again. Suddenly the walls could be read, the pyramid texts, the Book of the Dead, the hymns and the myths and the names of the gods, rose out of a silence of 2 millennia. Scholars and archaeologists have been reading ever since, piecing the fragments together, translating the spells, mapping the shifting shapes of the great stories. And it is through their long labour that we can spend tonight the way we are about to, drifting down the river of one of humanity's oldest dreams, hearing stories that were first told before the pyramids were built. So now, with the key in our hands and the river dark and calm around us, let us go back, all the way back, to the waters before the world. In the beginning, before the beginning, there was water. Not the sea as we know it, with a shore and a surface and a sun above, but water without end and without edge, water above and below and on every side, dark, still, and infinite. The Egyptians called it Nun, the primeval ocean, the deep before creation, the everything and nothing out of which all things would come. There was no sky, for there was nothing to arch over, no earth, for there was nothing to stand upon, no gods, no light, no time, only the dark water, silent and limitless, holding within itself, asleep, dissolved, unborn, every possibility that would ever be. It is worth resting a moment in that image, for it is one of the oldest pictures of the beginning that humankind has ever made, and it came naturally to the people of the Nile. Every year, in the season of the flood, they watched their whole world return to something like none. The river rose and spread across the land until Egypt became a single sheet of water, with villages standing like islands and the desert hills far away like the rim of another world. And every year as the flood withdrew, the first mounds of dark, glistening earth rose out of the water. New land, fresh and fertile, ready for the seed. Out of the waters, a mound. Out of the mound, life. The Egyptians saw the creation of the world happen in miniature every single year, and their story of the beginning is the story of the flood written across the whole cosmos. For out of none, in the first moment of all moments, there rose a mound, the primeval hill, the first solid thing, a piece of dry ground standing above the dark water like the first island of the flood. And upon that mound, or as that mound, for in the oldest tellings the distinction hardly matters, there came into being the first god. He is called Atum, a name that carries the sense of completeness, totality, the all, and he is also called Ra, the sun. And in many tellings he is Ra Atum, the sun in his aspect of origin, the light that kindles itself out of the darkness. No one made him. He arose of himself, willed himself into existence out of the waters, the self-created one, the great he who came into being. In some tellings he appears as a shining child, seated in the petals of a lotus flower that opens upon the water. In others, as a bird of light, the Bennu bird, alighting on the first stone with a cry that broke the eternal silence. In others, he is the mound itself, stirring into wakefulness. However the image is drawn, the meaning is the same. In the midst of the endless dark, something woke, and knew itself, and said, in the oldest words, I am. But Atum was alone, one being in an empty universe, and aloneness is not yet a world. And so the first god created the first others, out of himself, for there was nothing else to make them from. He brought forth from his own body twin children, Shu, the god of the air, of the dry bright breath of life, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture, of the mist and the rain damp, air and moisture, breath and dew, the first elements, the first division of the single into the many, the first family. The dark water now held three, the Maker and his twin children, the beginning of the long unfolding, and the unfolding continued. Shu and Tefnut, air and moisture, joined together, and brought forth children of their own, Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. And here Egyptian myth gives us one of its most beautiful and tender pictures, a picture painted on coffin lids and temple ceilings for thousands of years. Geb, the earth god, lies stretched out at rest, his body the hills and valleys of the land, and Nut, the sky goddess, arches over him, her body strung with stars, her fingertips touching the horizon in the west, and her toes the horizon in the east. Between them stands their father Shu, the air, holding the sky forever apart from the earth. For in the first days, earth and sky had lain locked together in embrace, and there was no room for anything to live. And so Shu lifted Nut high above Geb, and in the space between her starry body and his dark one, the world as we know it came to be. The space of air and light, of birds and rivers and human lives. When you stand under the night sky of Egypt, the old faith said, you are standing beneath the body of a goddess, arched in a dancer's bow over the whole world, and the stars are the jewels upon her skin. From Geb and Nut, in turn, came the last of the great first family, 4 children, some tellings say 5, whose names carry the central drama of all Egyptian myth. They were Osiris, the firstborn, good and radiant, born to kingship; Isis, great of magic, wise and faithful; Set, powerful and turbulent, the strong one of the desert; and Nephthys, the quiet lady of the house, the mourner. With their birth, the family of the great gods was complete. 9 in all: Atum the source, Shu and Tefnut, Geb and Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set and Nephthys. The Egyptians of the ancient city of Heliopolis, the city of the sun, counted these 9 as the great founding family of the cosmos, and we call them by the Greek name the Ennead, the 9. From the one came 2, from 2 came 2 more, from those came 4, from water, light, from light, air and moisture, from them earth and sky, and from earth and sky the gods of the great story that was to come, the story of a murdered king, a faithful queen, and a war for the throne of the world. But that story must wait a little, for the world itself is not yet finished. The story of Atum and the 9 was told at Heliopolis, and it became the most famous of Egypt's creation stories, but it was never the only one. Other great temple cities, told the beginning differently, each placing its own god at the heart of the mystery. And as we promised on the river, the Egyptians did not choose between these stories. They let them stand together, like different windows opening onto the same unspeakable dawn. Let us look through 2 or 3 of those other windows, for each shows us something the first one does not. At Memphis, the great capital near the meeting of the valley and the delta, the god of the beginning was Ptah, the craftsman of the gods, patron of builders and sculptors and makers of every kind, and the priests of Memphis told a creation of astonishing subtlety, preserved for us on a single precious stone. Ptah, they said, did not beget the world, he conceived it. Creation happened first in his heart, which to the Egyptians was the seat of thought, and then his tongue spoke what the heart had conceived, and at the sound of the words, the things themselves came into being. The gods, the sky, the earth, every living creature, every good thing, all were thought in the heart of Ptah, and spoken by his tongue. The world, in this telling, is a made thing in the deepest sense, not an accident, not a birth, but a work, imagined, designed, and called into existence by a divine word. It is one of the oldest visions in human history of creation through thought and speech, the idea that in the beginning was the word, and it was carved in Egypt centuries upon centuries before it appeared anywhere else. At Hermopolis, in Middle Egypt, the priests looked deeper into the darkness before the dawn, and they filled it with strange and shadowy powers. Before the mound rose, they said, the primeval waters themselves had qualities, depths within the deep, and these were the Ogdoad, the 8, 4 pairs of gods and goddesses who were the very substance of the before, Nun and Naune, the fathomless water, Her and Hauhet, endlessness without limit, Kek and Kauket, the darkness, Amun and Amaune, the hidden, the unknowable. The gods of the 8 were pictured as frogs and serpents, creatures of the mud and the wet dark, and they swam in the chaos before creation, until in some mysterious convulsion they came together, and from their meeting the mound rose, or the cosmic egg was laid upon it, and out of the egg broke the light. The 8 then sank back into stillness, their work done, the honoured ancestors of the dawn. In this telling the accent falls not on the maker, but on the mystery, on the unimaginable state before being, given names so that the mind can bow to it. And at Thebes, far up the river in the south, there rose in later ages the greatest god of Egypt's imperial centuries, Amun, whose very name means the hidden one. Amun had been one of the shadowy 8 of Hermopolis, a god of the invisible, but as Thebes rose to rule Egypt, Amun rose with it, until the priests of Thebes proclaimed him the true source of everything, the hidden power behind all the other creation stories at once. Amun, they sang, was the one who made himself in secret, whose true form no god has ever known. He was the deep breath in the waters of Nun, the honker of the great goose that laid the world egg, the hidden wind that stirred the beginning. He then became Atum on the mound. He was the heart and tongue of Ptah. He was the light of Ra. All the creations were his creation, seen from different shores. In Amun the Egyptians reached toward the idea of a god beyond all images, the mystery behind the mysteries, and when they joined him with the visible sun and worshipped Amun-Ra, hidden power and blazing light in one, they had made for themselves a king of the gods as great as any humankind has imagined. Hold these tellings side by side. The self-risen son of Heliopolis, the crafting word of Memphis, the dark 8 of Hermopolis, the hidden breath of Thebes, and you begin to feel how the Egyptians thought about ultimate things, not as a puzzle with one right answer, but as a sun too bright to look at directly, which the mind can only approach through many partial reflections. And in every telling, one thing stands constant, like the mound above the water. The world is an island of light and order, risen from a dark that has not gone away. None did not vanish when the world was made. The dark waters still surround the created cosmos on every side, above the sky, beneath the earth, held back but always there, lapping at the edges of being. The world is a bubble of order, in an ocean of chaos, and it endures not by itself, but because it is defended, renewed, and sailed through, every day, every night, by the god we must meet next, the sun himself, Ra, the voyager, the heart of the Egyptian cosmos. If you had asked an ancient Egyptian to point to God, they might well have pointed at the sun, not as a symbol of God, as God, visible, glorious, arriving every morning in unfailing faithfulness, the source of all light and warmth and time, the eye that sees everything and the fire that quickens everything. This is Ra, the sun god, the great god, the heart of Egyptian religion for 3,000 years. And to understand anything else in the mythology of Egypt, we must first learn to see the sun as the Egyptians saw it. Not as a ball of burning gas crossing empty space, but as a living god sailing a boat along a river in the sky. For the Egyptians, whose whole world was a river, the cosmos itself was built of rivers. The sky was a heavenly waterway. The body of Nut was also, in another image, a great celestial Nile, and upon it the sun travelled by boat, as everything in Egypt travelled by boat. Each morning Ra embarked in his day boat, the bark of millions of years, and set sail from the eastern horizon. All through the day he voyaged across the sky, attended by his crew of gods, Thoth the wise at his side, Mart the goddess of truth at the prow, Horus at the steering oar, and the hours of the day were the stations of his journey. At noon he rode high and blazing in his full strength. By late afternoon he was an old god, weary and golden, and at evening his boat reached the western horizon, the mouth of the west, the gateway of the dead, and passed below the world into the dark. And the Egyptians pictured the sun's changing faces with tender, homely images. The morning sun, newborn from the night, they saw as Khepri, the scarab beetle, because the scarab rolls a ball of dung across the ground as the beetle god rolls the young sun up over the horizon, and because from that humble ball new beetles hatch, as the new day hatches from the dark. The noon sun in his power was Ra in his full majesty, the falcon-headed king crowned with the blazing disk. The evening sun, old and mild, sinking toward the west, was Atum again, the aged creator, the grandfather light, returning toward the waters from which he first arose. Beetle, falcon, old man, birth, kingship, age. The sun lived a whole lifetime every single day, and died every single evening, and was born again every single morning. Time itself, in Egypt, was a god's daily biography, but it is the night that shows us the true depth of the Egyptian vision. When the sun sank below the western horizon, he did not simply go out, and he did not idle until dawn. He entered the Duat, the underworld, the hidden region beneath the earth, and began the most dangerous voyage in the universe. All night long, hour by hour, the boat of Ra sailed the dark river of the underworld, passing through 12 regions guarded by gates and demons, bringing, for 1 hour each, light and joy to the dead who dwelt there, who woke and rejoiced as the god passed, and mourned when his light moved on. And in the deepest hours of the night, the boat came to the place of the great enemy, Apophis, the enormous serpent of chaos, older than the gods, the undying remnant of the darkness before creation, who lies coiled in the depths of the underworld and hungers every night to swallow the sun and unmake the world. Every night. Not once, in some ancient battle long ago, but every single night, forever. The crew of the sunboat fought the serpent. Apophis would rear from the dark river, or drink the river dry to strand the boat, or fix the crew with his hypnotic stare, and the gods would fight him with spears and spells, and Set, yes, Set, the turbulent one, who for all his crimes was the strongest of the gods, stood at the prow in the worst hour, and drove his harpoon into the serpent's coils. Apophis can never be killed. Chaos cannot die, for it is not alive. It can only be beaten back, cut, bound, and scattered, until tomorrow night, when it gathers itself again. And when the serpent was driven off, the boat sailed on to the eastern gates, and in the deepest mystery of the night, Ra was joined for 1 hour with Osiris, the lord of the dead. The sun touched the source of resurrection, the two great gods became one, and from that union the sun drew the power to be born again. Then the horizon opened, and Khepri the beetle rolled the newborn sun up into the morning sky, and the world was saved, again. Feel the weight of that. Every sunrise, to Egyptian eyes, was a victory. The dawn was not a mechanism, it was a rescue. The world had passed, once more, through the narrowest place, past the coils of the serpent, and had been given back. This is why the hymns to the rising sun are among the most joyful poetry Egypt ever wrote. The baboons chatter and dance at dawn, the birds cry out, the whole land rejoices, because the light has come back from the dead. And this is why, in the deepest grammar of Egyptian belief, nothing good is ever won once and for all. Order must be renewed, morning by morning, forever. The universe is not a fact. It is a voyage, and the boat must be sailed. Around the figure of Ra, the Egyptians told a cluster of strange and powerful stories. Stories about his eye, about the birth of humanity, about a rebellion and a near destruction and the coming of death into the world. They are among the oldest myths of Egypt, and among the most revealing, for they carry the Egyptian answers to the great questions every mythology must face. Where do people come from? Why is the world imperfect? Why did the gods withdraw from the earth? Let us hear them as the night deepens around our drifting boat. The Eye of Ra is one of the strangest and most potent ideas in all Egyptian myth. The eye is the sun's power made separate, the blazing, seeing, striking force of the sun, imagined as a goddess in her own right, sometimes Hathor, sometimes Sekhmet, sometimes Tefnut or Bastet, or the serpent goddess Widget, who rears upon the brow of Ra and of every pharaoh, spitting fire at the enemies of the light. The eye is the daughter of Ra, his defender, his agent, his wrath and his radiance, and she is not entirely tame. In one very old story, the eye was sent out into the primeval darkness to search for the lost children of the Creator, Shu and Tefnut. When they wandered from him in the waters of Nun, the eye searched the dark and found them and brought them home. But while she was gone, the Creator, missing her, had grown a new eye in her place, and when the faithful eye returned and saw herself replaced, she wept with rage and grief, and from her tears, remit in the Egyptian tongue, there sprang up human beings, remich. From the tears of the eye of God, humankind was born. The Egyptians loved this play on words, and they meant something by it. People are born of a divine sorrow, kin to the light but watered with weeping, and the Creator, to soothe his faithful eye, set her upon his brow as the fire-spitting cobra, the Uraeus, where she blazes forever at the front of the sun. And humankind, born of the gods' tears, lived at first in a golden age. For in the beginning, the myths say, Ra himself reigned on earth as king. The sun god ruled gods and mortals together from his palace in Egypt. The world was young, and the god walked in it. But Ra grew old, for even the sun, in his earthly body, aged like a man. His bones became silver, his flesh gold, his hair true lapis lazuli, and as he grew old, humankind began to whisper against him. In the hill country, at the edges of the desert, people plotted rebellion against the aged sun, mocking his weakness, scheming against his rule. And Ra heard it, as the sun hears everything, and his heart grew bitter against the creatures born of his eyes' tears. So Ra called a secret council of the oldest gods. Even Nun, the ancient water, rose to counsel him, and the sentence was terrible. He would send his eye down among humankind, and the eye went forth as Sekhmet, the lioness, the most terrifying figure in the Egyptian pantheon, the raging son of Nun, the plague wind, the slaughterer. Sekhmet fell upon the rebels in the desert and destroyed them, and she waded in blood, and the taste of it entered her, and she did not stop. What began as justice became annihilation. The lioness raged down the valley, day after day, and it became clear that she would not cease until she had devoured the whole human race. And Ra, looking down at the destruction he had unleashed, repented. The heart of the old sun turned. He would not see his children utterly destroyed. But not even Ra could simply command the eye to stop. Her rage was beyond command, so the gods worked a trick. Through the night, the servants of Ra brewed 7,000 jars of beer, and mixed it with red ochre until it gleamed like blood. And in the hour before dawn they poured it out across the fields where the lioness slept, until the land lay flooded with what seemed a lake of blood. And Sekhmet woke, and saw it, and was glad. And she stooped and drank deeper, and the beer overcame her, and the rage went out of her like a fire drowned, and she rose at last gentle, golden, and mild, no longer Sekhmet the slaughterer, but Hathor the lady of joy, the goddess of love and music and drunkenness. Humankind was saved by beer, brewed in mercy, poured out by a god who could not bear to finish his own judgment, but something had broken that could not be mended. Ra, weary of the world he had made and the creatures who had betrayed him, chose to withdraw from the earth. The sky goddess Nut took the form of the great celestial cow. The old sun mounted upon her back, and she rose, trembling at the height, lifted by Shu and steadied by 8 gods at her legs. And thus the sun departed from the earth into the high heaven, where he has sailed ever since. The age when gods walked among mortals was over. Ra set the moon in the night to be his deputy, and Thoth to keep the reckoning of time. And between heaven and humankind there now stood distance, the beautiful, sorrowful distance we still look up into on any clear night. And with the gods' withdrawal, the myths say, death and toil entered the world of men in their full weight. The golden age was behind. History, our kind of time, with its labour and loss, had begun. Yet the Egyptians did not tell this as a story of abandonment. The sun still rises on every face, just and unjust alike. The eye still blazes on the brow of heaven, defending the world she once nearly destroyed. And every temple ritual, every offering, every hymn was part of the great work of keeping the bond between the withdrawn gods and the human world unbroken. The gods are far, but the river of the sky flows over every roof in Egypt, and the boat passes, faithful forever. Before we come to the great drama of Osiris, the murder, the grief, the war, and the resurrection that stand at the center of all Egyptian myth, we must pause on a single small image, a feather, a white ostrich plume, light enough to tremble at a breath. For that feather is the emblem of the deepest idea in all Egyptian thought, the idea that everything else in this night's story leans upon. And unless we hold it, nothing in Egypt, not the gods, not the judgment of the dead, not the throne of the pharaohs, quite makes sense. The feather is Maat. Maat is a word with no single translation, because it names something the Egyptians felt as one thing, and we have divided into many. It is truth, it is justice, it is order, the right order of the world, the sun rising on time, the river flooding in season, the stars keeping their courses. It is harmony between people, honesty in the market, fairness in the court, kindness to the widow and the boatless man. It is the way things ought to be, in the sky, in the state, and in the human heart. All of it one seamless fabric. When the Egyptians wanted to say that the world was going well, they said Maat was in her place. When they spoke of wickedness, injustice, disease, invasion, famine, lies, all of it was one thing too, the opposite of Maat, Isfet, disorder, the chaos that forever gnaws at the edges of the world like the serpent gnawing at the boat of the sun. And Maat was a goddess, a serene woman with the white feather rising from her headband, but a goddess of a special kind. She has few temples and almost no stories. She does not scheme or marry or battle. She is less a character than a presence. The daughter of Ra, who came into being when the light first shone on the waters, for the first sunrise was the first act of order in the universe. She rides at the prow of the sunboat, because the sun's faithful journey is itself the heartbeat of Maat. The gods themselves are said to live on Maat. She is their food and their breath, for even the gods exist within the right order, not above it. In the deepest sense, Maat is what the gods are for, and Maat is what people are for as well. This is the beautiful, demanding heart of Egyptian ethics. Every human being, from the pharaoh to the poorest fisherman in the reeds, stood every day at a quiet crossroads between Maat and Isfet, between upholding the order of the world and injuring it, to speak truth, to deal fairly, to feed the hungry, to ferry the stranger who had no boat. These were not merely nice things to do. They were acts of cosmic maintenance, small hands laid on the great fabric, helping to hold the world together against the dark waters. And to lie, to cheat, to do violence, these were not merely crimes. They were small tears in the fabric, tiny victories for the serpent. The Egyptians took this so seriously that, as we shall see, they made it the very test of eternity. At the end of every human life, in the hall of judgment, the heart of the dead, the little record of every choice, is weighed in the balance against a single white feather, the feather of Maat. A human life, weighed against the principle of truth, and eternity hangs on which pan sinks. The pharaoh too. We shall meet again in this light. His entire duty, in one phrase repeated for 3,000 years, was to establish Maat and drive out Isfet, to be, on earth, what the sun is in the sky, and the temples, the rituals, the offerings that filled Egyptian life, all of them were framed as gifts of Maat. In the innermost rite of every sanctuary, the king or priest lifts up to the god a tiny seated figure of the goddess with her feather, offering order itself, the world rightly kept, as the most precious gift there is. Hold the feather, then, as we go on into the great stories. For the tale of Osiris and Set that now opens before us is, beneath all its passion and strangeness, a story about Maat, about the right order broken by violence, defended by faithfulness, and restored by justice, about the feather outweighing the sword, and hold it, too, for its tenderness. Of all the emblems the ancient world chose for ultimate things, thunderbolts, thrones, swords of judgment, Egypt chose the lightest object in creation. Truth, said this oldest of civilizations, does not press down. It barely touches the scale, and yet nothing in heaven or earth outweighs it. Now the river carries us to the heart of the whole mythology, the story that mattered most, told longest, and reached deepest into Egyptian life. The story that every tomb, every mummy, every funeral rite in 3,000 years of Egyptian history retold in miniature. It is the story of Osiris, the good king who was murdered by his brother, mourned and made whole by his wife, avenged by his son, and raised beyond death to become the Lord of eternity. It begins in a golden age, and it begins with a birth foretold in thunder. When Nut the sky goddess was carrying her children, the old stories say a prophecy ran through heaven. She would bear a son who would be king of all the world, and Osiris was born, the firstborn of earth and sky. And at his birth, a great voice cried out that the Lord of all things had come into the world. He grew into the most beautiful of the gods, tall, dark-skinned as the fertile earth, gentle-eyed, radiant with quiet majesty. And when Geb the earth god gave up the kingship of the world, Osiris ascended the throne of Egypt, with his sister Isis, wisest and most steadfast of the goddesses, as his queen beside him. The reign of Osiris was Egypt's dream of the Golden Age. For humankind, in those days, so the story goes, lived in savagery, wandering, warring, without law, and in some tellings even devouring one another. And Osiris, the good king, civilized them. Not with the sword, but with gifts and teaching, with music and persuasion. He taught them to plant the grain and tend the vine, to harvest, to grind, to bake bread and brew beer and press wine. He was forever after the god of the growing corn and the fruitful vine. He gave them laws and taught them to live by them. He taught them to honor the gods and built the first temples. He taught them the arts of settled life, the crafts and the music, and it was said that he tamed the world not by conquest, but by song. And when Egypt was ordered and flourishing, he traveled through the whole earth, civilizing every land he passed, while Isis ruled Egypt wisely in his absence. The world under Osiris was the world as it ought to be. Mart made visible, the feather at rest, the fields green, the people at peace, the good king on the throne of a grateful land, and in the shadow of all that radiance stood his brother. Set, the younger brother, the strong one, was everything Osiris was not. Where Osiris was the black soil of the valley, Set was the red sand of the desert. Where Osiris was the gentle river, Set was the storm and the thunder voice. Where Osiris ruled by love, Set burned to rule at all. He was not, we should say clearly, a devil. Egypt's imagination was suppler than that. Set was a necessary power gone wrong. The strength that guards the sunboat in the deepest night, the fierce vitality of the wild places, but turned inward now, curdling into envy. He watched his brother's glory. He watched the land adore him. He watched the throne that would never be his. And envy, as it does, dressed itself in patience. Set said nothing. Set smiled at feasts. And Set began, in the dark of his heart, to plan, and he gathered to himself 72 conspirators and waited for his hour. The Egyptians, who loved wordplay and symbol, saw the whole world mirrored in these two brothers. Every year they watched the black land and the red land meet in a knife-sharp line at the edge of the fields, fertility and desolation lying side by side, forever contending. Every year the river rose in life-giving flood and shrank again as the desert winds bore down. Osiris and Set were that eternal border made into story. The green world and the waste, abundance and drought, the settled field and the howling wilderness. Brothers, always brothers, locked together at the very foundation of things. And this is why the story that is coming was never, for Egypt, just a palace tragedy. When Set raises his hand against Osiris, the desert is striking at the sown, death itself is striking at life, and the question the whole myth asks, the question Egypt asked for 30 centuries and answered with every green shoot that rose from the black earth, is whether that blow can ever truly win. The blow fell at a feast. It is one of the most chilling scenes in ancient literature, precisely because it is so intimate. No armies, no storm of divine wrath, just a banquet, a beautiful object, a party game, and a trap sprung by a smiling brother. Set had prepared his device with terrible care. Secretly, he had taken the measure of Osiris's body, in some tellings by night, as the king slept, and he had commissioned a chest built exactly to those measurements, a chest of fragrant cedar, inlaid with ebony and ivory, painted and gilded, adorned with gold and lapis, the most beautiful casket ever made, sized to fit one man in all the world. Then he gave a great banquet for Osiris's return from his travels, and all the court came, and the 72 conspirators among them. And when the feast was at its height, the wine poured, the music playing, the lamps bright, servants carried the wonderful chest into the hall, and the whole company cried out at its beauty. And Set, laughing, proposed a game. Let each guest lie down in the chest in turn, and whoever fit it perfectly should have it as a gift. One by one the guests tried, too tall, too short, too broad, each climbing out laughing while the company applauded. And then Osiris, the good king, the trusting brother, who in all his gentle life had never learned to suspect, rose from his place and lay down in the chest built to his own body, and it fit him perfectly. And in that instant the laughter died. The conspirators rushed forward, slammed down the lid, nailed it fast, and sealed every seam with molten lead. The most beautiful casket in the world had become a coffin. And this, the Egyptians understood with a shiver, was the first coffin, the prototype of every mummy case ever after adorned with gold and lapis. Every Egyptian burial carried the memory of this moment, the beloved body sealed in beauty. They carried the chest through the night and cast it into the Nile, and the river bore it away northward, through the sleeping land Osiris had made green toward the sea. The good king was gone, vanished from the world in a single treacherous hour. Set seized the throne, and the golden age ended like a lamp blown out. In the myth's shorthand, Isfet sat in the seat of Maat. The desert had won, the storm ruled the riverland, and the world entered its first winter. For wherever Osiris's power withdrew, the green withered, and grief lay on Egypt like the dust of the red land. But the story does not follow the usurper. It follows a woman. For when the news came to Isis, queen, sister, wife, she did not collapse, and she did not hide. She cut her hair, put on mourning, and walked out of the palace into the wide world, alone, to find her husband's body. And with that decision, a decision of pure, stubborn, unkillable love, begins one of the greatest quests in all mythology, the search of Isis, the faithful one, who would wander the length of the earth, asking everyone she met, nobles, fishermen, washerwomen at the river, children playing by the shore. For children, the Egyptians said, notice everything, whether they had seen a chest of cedar and gold go by on the water, and far away, the chest had come to rest. The river had carried it to the sea, and the sea had borne it along the coast to the city of Byblos in the land of Lebanon, and cast it ashore at the foot of a young tamarisk tree. And the tree, as if it knew what treasure lay against its roots, grew around the chest, swiftly and wonderfully, enclosing it entirely within its trunk. And the tree grew so vast and so fragrant that word of it reached the king of Byblos, who had it cut down and raised as the great pillar of his palace hall, never knowing that within the pillar lay the coffin, and within the coffin the body of a god. There, hidden in the heart of a tree, in the heart of a foreign king's house, the Lord of Life waited in the dark, while far away a woman in mourning followed the coastline north, asking the children by the water what the waves had carried past. Follow the woman in mourning now, for this is her hour, and there is no figure in all ancient religion quite like her. Isis, great of magic, mistress of cunning, more clever than a million gods, as the texts say. And yet her power in this story is not thunder or armies, it is persistence. It is love that refuses to be finished. Across the whole ancient world, for thousands of years after, when people spoke of faithfulness stronger than death, this was the face they saw. A queen in a plain dress, walking from town to town, asking after a chest the sea had taken. The trail of rumour led her at last to Byblos, and to the strange tale of the wonderful tree that had grown overnight at the shore, and now stood as a pillar in the king's hall. Isis knew, but she did not storm the palace. The great enchantress came quietly, as a weary foreign woman, and sat down by the well of the city, veiled, speaking to no one. And when the queen of Byblos's handmaidens came to the well, Isis braided their hair for them and breathed on them such fragrance, the perfume of a goddess, that when they returned, the queen marvelled and asked after the stranger. And so the wandering woman was brought into the palace and became the nurse of the queen's infant son. And here the myth gives us one of its strangest, most haunting scenes. Isis grew to love the child she nursed. By day she cared for him as any nurse, but by night, when the household slept, she worked upon him a secret blessing. She laid the baby in the heart of the fire, the flames licking around him harmlessly, burning away, slowly, night by night, everything in him that could die, while she herself, in the form of a swallow, flew circling around the pillar that held her husband's body, crying the thin sorrowful cry of that bird, mourning, night after night, the child in the holy fire, the swallow circling the pillar, the palace asleep, until one night the queen came upon the scene, saw her baby lying in the flames, and screamed. And the spell was broken, the child's immortality lost in his mother's terror. And Isis rose up out of the swallow shape in her true form, blazing, the goddess revealed. And the royal house fell to the floor before her. She asked for only one thing, the pillar. They gave it, trembling. She had it cut open, and lifted out the chest, and fell upon it with a cry so terrible, the story says, that it struck one of the royal children dead. Grief, for a moment, unveiled in its full divine magnitude. Then she took the coffin home to Egypt by ship, and hid it in the marshes of the delta, among the reeds and the still water, while she went to prepare what must be prepared. The searcher had found. The faithful one had brought her husband home. But the story is not done being cruel. For Set, hunting by night in the marshes, under the moon, came upon the hidden chest, and recognizing it, he was seized by a rage beyond his first crime. This time there would be no coffin to find, no body to weep over, no husband to bring home. He tore the body of Osiris into pieces, 14 in the most common telling, and scattered them the length of Egypt. One piece here, one piece there, flung into the river, cast into the fields, hidden in the reeds of distant provinces, so that the good king was not merely dead, but dispersed, unmade, everywhere and nowhere, beyond finding, beyond mourning, beyond any hope of wholeness. Set, the desert, had done to the god of the green land what the desert does, scattered him like dust, and Isis began again. That is the whole of her greatness, and the myth knows it. She began again. In a boat of papyrus she went up and down the river, through the marshes and the backwaters, province by province, searching for the pieces of her husband, and now she was not alone. Her sister Nephthys came to her. Nephthys, the quiet one, Set's own wife, who chose her murdered brother's cause over her husband's crime, and whose mourning voice joins Isis's in every funeral lament Egypt ever sang. And Anubis came, the jackal-headed one, guide of the dead, and wherever they found a piece of the god, and they found them, one by one, over long wandering, the local tradition said a shrine was raised on that spot, which is why, ever after, a dozen towns of Egypt each claimed proudly to be the burial place of Osiris. The god's scattered body became the sacred geography of the whole land. Egypt itself, province by province, was the body of Osiris, gathered and hallowed. Only one piece was never recovered, swallowed, the story says, by the fish of the river, so that even restored, the god would bear forever the mark of loss. Wholeness in Egypt is always wholeness after breaking. Then, in the secrecy of the marshes, the great work was done. Isis and Nephthys laid out the gathered body, Anubis, inventing, in that hour, the art he would preside over forever, bound and anointed it, joining what was severed, wrapping it in linen, the first mummy, the pattern of every embalming that Egypt would perform for the next 3,000 years. Thoth the wise lent his spells. Isis wove her own around them, and when the body was whole and wrapped and lying still, Isis took the form of a kite, a small, keen falcon of the riverlands, and hovered above her husband on beating wings, fanning breath and warmth back into him, with the wind of her feathers, crying out the great lament that the temple singers would repeat for 30 centuries. Come to your house, beautiful one. Come to your house, you whom I love, come back to me. And the gods stirred. Not to rise and reign again in the land of the living. That door had closed, and even the love of Isis could not force it. But life came back into him just so far, just long enough, for the myth's most tender miracle. In that hour, between death and eternity, in the hidden marsh, Isis conceived a child by her restored husband. Out of the uttermost defeat, a murdered, scattered, twice-mourned king, came the seed of the future, a son, not yet born, who already had a name and a destiny, Horus, the avenger, the rightful heir, the falcon who would one day fly at the storm. And Osiris, his work in the living world complete, sank away from it, downward and inward, into the hidden country beneath the horizon, where the gods gave him a new throne, greater in its way than the one he had lost. He became king of the Duat, lord of the dead, ruler of eternity, the still, rapt, green-faced majesty at the heart of the underworld, before whom every human soul would one day stand. The good king was dead. Long live the good king, below. And in the world above, in the papyrus thickets of the delta, a pregnant goddess hid from the reigning power of the earth and waited to bring forth the war. Now the myth softens for a while and becomes something unexpected. A story about a mother and a baby hiding. Before Horus is a war god, Before the great battles and the tribunal of heaven, he is an infant in the reeds, hunted, sick, stung, feverish, wailing, and his mother is alone with him in the wilderness, keeping him alive by wit and magic and sleepless watching. The Egyptians adored this part of the story. They painted it, sang it, wore it as amulets. For 1,000 years and more, the image of Isis nursing the child Horus in her lap was among the most beloved pictures in the world, and its afterlife, in other arms and under other names, would outlast Egypt itself. Isis bore her son in secret, in the floating papyrus thickets of Chemis, deep in the delta marshes, a hidden island of reeds and birds and green water light, as far from Set's throne as the geography of myth could put her. There she raised him in concealment, for the reigning king of the world was hunting precisely this child. The heir, the proof that Osiris's line was not extinguished, the small sleeping argument against the usurper's eternity. Set's servants and Set's creatures watched the land, and so the Queen of Heaven lived like a fugitive, veiled, poor, unknown, begging her bread in the villages by day, returning to the hidden nest by night, one woman between the storm god and the future. And the marsh itself, for all its shelter, was full of death. Serpents and scorpions, fevers and crocodiles, the small daily terrors of every real Egyptian mother, raised in the myth to cosmic stakes. In the most famous of these tales, Isis returned one evening to find the child burning with poison, stung or bitten in her absence, the venom deep in him, his little body rigid, his cry failing. And Isis, who could enchant the sky, found that no spell of hers could master this poison, and the great goddess did what any village mother would do. She screamed for help, and the marsh answered. The neighbors came running with their lamps, and heaven itself stopped. The boat of Ra, the texts say, stood still in the sky, the sun itself halted, until Thoth came down from the bark, with the authority of the eldest light, and spoke the great spell, and drew the poison out, and the child breathed, and the sun moved on. The Egyptians used this story, word for word, as medicine. For 3,000 years, over every scorpion-stung child in Egypt, healers recited the tale of the poisoned Horus, because what had healed the god-child once, in the beginning, must heal every child forever. The story was the cure. So the boy grew, hidden, guarded, nursed through every danger, and the marsh years shaped him. He grew up knowing exactly who he was, and exactly what had been taken. His father murdered before his birth, his mother a hunted widow, his inheritance worn by the murderer. The Egyptians called him Har-Sisa, Horus son of Isis, and Harendots, Horus the avenger of his father. His very names were the story. And when he came to young manhood, lean, burning, falcon-eyed, the vision came. His father Osiris rose to him from the underworld, in dream or in shadow, and trained him, questioning him in the ways of battle and right. And when the dead king was satisfied, he asked his son the question on which everything turned. What is the most glorious deed a man can do? And Horus answered, to avenge his father and his mother for the evil done to them. Then the time of hiding was over. The falcon rose out of the reeds, and the young god went up out of the marshes to the tribunal of heaven, to stand before all the gods and claim the throne of the world from the strongest being in it. What followed was not a single battle, but an age of struggle. 80 years of it, the texts say, part war, part lawsuit, part contest of magic and trickery. The contendings of Horus and Set, the longest quarrel in the mythology of Egypt, fought in courtrooms and rivers and deserts, before the great tribunal of the gods presided over by Ra himself. The Egyptians told it in many moods, as high cosmic drama, and also, in one famous papyrus, as something close to comedy, with the gods bickering, sulking, taking bribes, and writing each other testy letters. Under all its turns, though, the question is deadly serious, and it is the question of Mart itself. Does the throne of the world belong to strength or to right, to the mighty hand or the lawful heir? Round after round, the tribunal swayed. Set stood before the gods, vast and glittering, and made the argument of power. I am the strongest of the gods. I alone stand at the prow of the sunboat and drive back the serpent every night. The world is defended by my arm, and the throne belongs to the one who can hold it. And some of the gods nodded, even Ra inclined toward him, valuing the guardian of his boat. But Thoth the wise, and Isis the unresting, and the greater voice of justice kept the claim of Horus alive. The throne is not spoil, it passes from father to son. The murdered king has an heir, and right does not die with the body. And Shu, the ancient heir, spoke the sentence the whole myth exists to speak. Justice should prevail over mere strength. Set, unable to win the argument, tried everything else. He proposed contests and rigged them. Isis unrigged them with better tricks. He demanded the tribunal move to an island, and that the ferryman carry no woman across. Isis bribed the ferryman, crossed disguised as an old crone, and then, transforming into a beautiful stranger, lured Set into pronouncing judgment against himself, telling him a sad tale of a widow's son robbed of his father's cattle by a stranger, until Set, indignant, cried out that the stranger deserved punishment, and the cattle belonged to the son, and Isis burst into her true form, crying that Set had judged his own case, and the tribunal roared. There were duels, the two of them as hippopotami, contending under the water, a race in boats of stone, in which Horus slyly built a boat of pine painted like stone, while Set's true stone vessel sank. Trickery answering trickery, generation against generation, and the war had its terrible wounds, which Egypt never forgot. In the worst of the fighting, Set tore out the eye of Horus, tore it, in some tellings, to pieces, and Horus in his turn maimed Set, and the mutilated eye of the falcon became, once Thoth had found its fragments and healed it whole, the most sacred symbol in all of Egypt, the Wedjat, the eye of Horus, the restored eye, sign of healing after harm, wholeness after breaking, the good thing lost and made complete again. Egyptians wore it on their bodies, and painted it on their coffins for 3,000 years. It watched from the prow of every boat, and in every temple ritual, whatever was offered to the gods was called the Eye of Horus. For every gift, in Egypt, was the restoration of something broken. There is even a strange, sorrowful interlude, in which the exhausted tribunal wrote a letter to Osiris himself, down in the country of the dead, asking his judgment, and the answer came back up out of the west, with the weight of the underworld in it. Why is my son cheated of my throne? I, who made the barley and the wheat that feed both gods and men, and, more quietly, a reminder that made even the sun god pause, that all things, gods and stars and judges alike, come down at last to the land where Osiris reigns, that the west waits patiently for every disputant, and that the justice denied above will be remembered below. Heaven read the letter from the dead king, and shivered, and made up its mind. So at last, after 80 years, after every contest and every trick, the tribunal ruled. The throne of the world belonged to Horus, son of Osiris, the heir, the lawful one, the falcon. The son had won his father's seat. The widow's long war was over. Isis stood vindicated beside her crowned child, and the gods lifted the white crown onto the head of Horus. And the world, which had lain under usurpation since the lid slammed shut on the cedar chest, came back into mart like a boat coming back to its mooring. As for Set, the endings differ, and the difference is beautiful. In some tellings he is bound and humiliated, made to carry Osiris like a boat. In the darkest ones he is destroyed. But in the telling Egypt seems to have loved best. Ra took the loser up into the sky, gave him a place in the sunboat, at the prow, where his terrible strength was not a crime but a calling, and there Set stands every night until the end of time, harpoon in hand, facing the serpent of chaos on behalf of the very order he once broke. Egypt did not waste even its villains. The storm, too, has its post. The desert, too, defends the world, and the strongest of the gods spends eternity doing at last what strength is for. Now our boat turns toward the west, toward the country beyond the sunset, the hidden kingdom where the second half of Egyptian mythology lives. For everything we have followed so far, creation, the sun's voyage, the murder and the vindication, flows at last into the west, into the realm of the dead, and there, on a throne in the deepest hall of the hidden world, sits the god whose story made that realm a place of hope instead of horror. Osiris did not merely survive his myth. He transformed what death itself meant, first for kings, then, in one of the great quiet revolutions of human belief, for everyone. Picture him as Egypt pictured him, in 10,000 tomb paintings. Osiris enthroned, wrapped like a mummy in white linen, his hands emerging to hold the crook and the flail, the shepherd's care and the harvester's power, his face serene and his skin green, green as the young barley, for he is forever the god of life that comes again, or black, black as the river mud from which all growing things rise. On his head, the tall white crown flanked with plumes, and behind his throne, faithful past death as in life, stand Isis and Nephthys, their hands raised in eternal protection. He is called Lord of the Westerners. For the dead, In Egypt were the Westerners, the people of the sunset side, and foremost of the West, and king of eternity. He does not move, he does not need to. Everything comes to him. Every human life, the Egyptians said, is a river flowing west, and here is the marvel. Because of his story, the West was not a place of despair. Compare the neighbors. In Mesopotamia, in these same centuries, the dead went to a house of dust where they crouched in darkness eating clay. In early Greece, the shades squeaked like bats in a gloom that Achilles himself said was worse than the meanest life above. Egypt, alone in the ancient world in the completeness of its answer, looked at death and said, "There is a kingdom there, and a king, and he is good." And he was dead himself, and came through it. And what happened to him can happen to you. That is the engine at the heart of all Egyptian religion. Osiris was murdered, broken, scattered, and was gathered, mourned, made whole, and lives. Therefore the human dead, if they are gathered and mourned and made whole in his pattern, will live too. Every mummy was an Osiris. Every funeral was the marsh rite of Isis performed again in miniature. The body preserved and wrapped as Anubis wrapped the god, the widow and the sister mourning as Isis and Nephthys mourned, the son performing the rites as Horus performed them, the dead person addressed, from the moment of death onward, as the Osiris so-and-so, your own name joined to the gods, your death grafted onto his death, so that his resurrection might carry yours the way a great river carries a small boat. In the beginning, in the age of the pyramids, this glory belonged to the king alone. The pyramid texts speak of the dead pharaoh rising to the sky, joining the sun, becoming Osiris among the imperishable stars, while ordinary folk hoped for no more than a quiet grave and offerings. But as the centuries passed, and the old order broke and reformed, something extraordinary happened, which scholars have called the democratization of the afterlife. The spells and hopes of kings spread outward and downward, onto the coffins of nobles, then of scribes, then of craftsmen and farmers and mothers of families, until the promise stood open to every soul in Egypt. Whoever could be mummified, mourned, and justified, whoever lived by Mart and passed the judgment, might become an Osiris and live forever. Whether he had ruled the two lands or mended sandals in a village by the river, eternity ceased to be a royal privilege and became a human birthright. It is one of the great, generous turns in the history of religion, and Egypt made it almost without commentary. Quietly, coffin by coffin, as if it had always been obvious that the god who was gathered from the river's length belonged to everyone who lived along it. But, and Egypt was clear-eyed about this, the West had to be reached, and the king's presence had to be earned. Between the tomb and the throne of Osiris lay the Duat, the dark country, the land of gates and guardians, of trials and terrors, through which every soul must travel, and at the end of the road, the hall of judgment and the scales. The Egyptians did not imagine paradise as a gift handed over at the moment of death. They imagined it as a destination, with a road, a map, dangers, passwords, and a final examination before the most honest court in the universe. And so they prepared, as no people has ever prepared, for a journey. The mummy, the tomb, the paintings, the amulets, the scrolls of spells laid beside the dead, all of it was travel equipment. Let us now do what every Egyptian soul expected to do. Let us make the journey ourselves, down into the Duat, through the gates, past the guardians, to the hall of the scales, and see what waited there. The journey begins not in the underworld, but in the world above, in the quiet, incense-heavy tent of purification on the west bank of the river, where the dead were made ready for eternity. And it begins with a god who has watched over that threshold since before Osiris himself came to the west. Anubis, the jackal, one of the oldest, gentlest, and most misunderstood figures in Egyptian myth. His image everyone knows, the lithe black canine lying alert atop a shrine, or the jackal-headed god bending with grave tenderness over a wrapped body. His origins are older than the Osiris story. In the earliest ages it was Anubis, not Osiris, who ruled the dead, and his form comes from a hard desert truth. Jackals prowled the shallow graves at the desert's edge. The Egyptians, with their genius for transformation, took the very creature they feared for their dead and made him the dead's protector, the guard dog of eternity, set at the door of the grave to keep away everything that prowls. His blackness is not the blackness of dread, but of the river mud and the mummy's resin, the colour, in Egypt, of resurrection. When the Osiris myth rose to the centre, Anubis was woven into it as the embalmer of the god, he who wrapped the first mummy in the marshes, and he kept forever after the offices he held that night. Lord of the sacred land, he who is upon his mountain, watching from the desert cliffs, he who is in the place of embalming, master of the purification tent, the opener of the ways of the west. Under his patronage, the embalmers did their long work, 70 days, the canonical span, from death to burial. We will not linger on the technical matters. What matters for our story is what the Egyptians believed the work meant. The body was not preserved out of squeamishness about decay, nor from a failure to accept death. It was preserved because the person, in Egyptian understanding, was a federation, a union of body and several souls, and the body was the gathering place, the home base, to which the soul parts must be able to return. There was the ka, the life force, the double, which needed the offerings of food and drink, the ba, pictured as a bird with a human face, the travelling soul, free to fly out into the day and return at evening, the ak, the transfigured spirit, the shining one that the blessed dead became, and with them the shadow, and the name. For a person lives, said Egypt, as long as their name is spoken. Destroy the body utterly, and the federation had no meeting place. Preserve it, and the parts could reunite each night like a family gathering at home. The mummy was an anchor for eternity, and every stage of its making echoed the myth. The body washed as Osiris was washed, anointed as he was anointed, wrapped in linen bandages as Isis and Anubis wrapped the god, amulets bound in at every layer, the eye of Horus at the throat for wholeness, the scarab at the heart for the morning's rebirth. Then, on the day of burial, at the door of the tomb, came the rite the Egyptians thought most necessary of all, the opening of the mouth. The mummy, or its statue, was set upright, facing the mourners, and the officiating priest, ideally the eldest son, playing Horus to his father's Osiris, as Horus once performed these very rites for his father, touched the face of the dead with sacred instruments, the mouth, the eyes, the ears, and with each touch, a faculty was given back. The mouth was opened so the dead could speak and eat and name themselves in the hereafter. The eyes to see the sun, the ears to hear the prayers. It was, in essence, the reversal of death's silencing, the family standing at the tomb door and insisting, with holy stubbornness, that this person was not ended. See, the mouth opens, see, the eyes see. Then the mummy was carried down into its chamber, laid within its nested coffins painted with sky goddesses and protective texts, surrounded with the goods of daily life, and beside it was placed the scroll, the map and passport for the road ahead, the book of coming forth by day. The lamps were withdrawn, the tomb was sealed, the mourners went back to the river and the sunlight, and in the darkness the journey began. One tender detail of the embalmer's craft deserves its own moment. The inner organs, removed for the body's preservation, were not discarded. Nothing of a person was discarded, but were dried, wrapped and laid in 4 vessels, the canopic jars, each under the guardianship of one of the 4 sons of Horus, Imseti the human-headed, keeper of the liver, Hapi the baboon, keeper of the lungs, Duamutef the jackal, keeper of the stomach, and Kebasenuef the falcon, keeper of the intestines. And because even guardians need guarding, each of the 4 sons was watched over in turn by a great goddess, Isis, Nephthys, Neith, and Selket, their protecting arms carved spread-winged at the corners of the canopic chest, and, in the richest burials, standing golden around the shrine itself, 4 small queens of heaven encircling a person's most fragile remains. The heart alone, as we shall see, stayed in the breast, for it had an appointment in the Hall of Two Truths. Everything else travelled in the care of this double ring of protectors, 4 sons of the falcon, 4 goddesses around them, a bodyguard of 8 for the humblest tissues of the humblest justified soul. No civilization has ever taken more elaborate care of the human body's discarded parts, because in Egypt no part of a person was ever truly discarded. What was it like? The road through the underworld. The Egyptians answered in loving, fearful detail, in the Book of the Dead and the great royal underworld books painted on tomb walls, and the picture they drew is one of the most extraordinary imaginative constructions of the ancient mind. Not a pit, not a void, but a country. The Duat was a whole hidden world, with its own geography, a dark river winding through it, banks and caverns, lakes of fire, fields and strongholds, and through this country ran the road of the dead, barred by gate after gate, each gate with its guardian, each guardian with its name and its challenge. 12 regions, like the 12 hours of the night, portals whose keepers bore names like Great of Flame and She Who Devours, twisting paths where the wrong turn led into fire, or the jaws of waiting things. The soul walked the same dark country the sun sailed through each night. The dead and the sun god shared one underworld, and if the soul was fortunate, it might even be taken aboard the boat of Ra itself for part of the way, travelling in the god's own light through the hours of the dark. Against the dangers, the dead carried knowledge. This is profoundly Egyptian. The underworld was survived not by strength, but by knowing the road, knowing the names. At each gate the guardian demanded to be named. "I will not let you pass," says the doorbolt itself in one spell, "unless you tell me my name," and the scroll supplied it, and the parts of the gate, the floor, the very ferry boat of the underworld piece by piece demanded their secret names, and the well-equipped soul answered every one. To name a thing, in Egypt, was to have power over it. The Book of the Dead was above all a book of names, nearly 200 spells of passwords, declarations and transformations, the accumulated travel wisdom of 2,000 years, copied out by scribes and rolled beside the mummy's arm. With the right spell the dead could turn aside the serpents of the road, cool the lakes of fire, breathe air and drink water in the dry dark, avoid the horror of walking upside down, and transform into a falcon of gold, a heron, a lotus, a living bee-bird, slipping through the perilous country in whatever shape the passage required. Hour by hour, gate by gate, the road descended and then began to rise. Toward the place every spell and every amulet and every mourner's prayer had aimed at from the start. A great hall of two truths, columned and dim, where the air itself seems to hold its breath. At its far end, enthroned beneath a canopy, sits the rapt and silent king of the dead, green-faced, crook and flail crossed upon his breast. Before the throne stands a great balance of gold, its pans hanging empty and level. Beside the balance waits a slender god, with the head of an ibis, pen and palette ready. And near him, patient, unhurried, terrible, crouches a creature with the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. Amit, the devourer of the dead, the swallower of hearts, in whom the three great man-killers of the riverland are joined into one waiting mouth. 42 judges line the walls, one for every province of Egypt, one for every sin. This is the hall of judgment. The road ends here. And here, at the scales, we arrive at the very center of Egyptian religion, the scene painted more often than any other in all their art, the moment for which every Egyptian, king or farmer, prepared their whole life long, the weighing of the heart. The dead soul steps into the hall alone. Whatever they were in the world above, pharaoh or fisherman, priestess or potter, they enter this room as every human being enters it, a single person, carrying a single heart, walking toward a balance. Anubis, the gentle jackal, leads them in by the hand. The texts show him guiding the dead like a father leading a child, and brings them before the scales, and there the heart is taken. The heart, which the Egyptians held to be the seat of mind and memory and will, the little archive in which every deed and choice of a lifetime is written, and it is placed, small and dark, in one pan of the golden balance, and into the other pan, weightless and white, is laid a single feather, the feather of Mart, truth. The whole apparatus of eternity comes down to this one image, the simplest and most searching in all religious art, a human life on one side, the principle of truth on the other, and the beam trembling between them. But before the beam settles, the dead must speak. This is the part the Egyptians called making the declaration. We know it as the negative confession, and it is one of the most remarkable moral documents of the ancient world. Standing before Osiris and the 42 assessors, the soul addresses each judge by name and declares, clause by clause, the evil it has not done. I have not done injustice, I have not robbed, I have not killed, I have not made anyone weep, I have not spoken lies, I have not defrauded the humble man of his goods, I have not made anyone hungry, I have not stopped up the water in its season. For in Egypt, to block a neighbor's irrigation was sin against the world itself. I have not held back the flood, I have not added to the weights of the balance, nor tampered with the plummet of the scales. Hear the texture of it. Hardly a word about ritual, almost everything about how one treated other people. The hungry, the weeping, the boatless, the weak. 4,000 years ago, this civilization declared that what eternity wants to know about a human being is whether they were just and honest and kind. And then the declaration ends, and the hall is silent, and the beam of the balance moves, for the heart cannot lie. Whatever the mouth has claimed, the heart weighs what it weighs. The Egyptians so feared the heart's honesty that they bound over it, in the mummy's wrappings, a scarab amulet inscribed with a spell begging the heart itself. "O my heart of my mother, my heart of my being, do not stand up against me as a witness, do not tip the scale against me." It is one of the most nakedly human prayers ever written, the plea that what we truly are might not betray what we hope to be. Thoth, the ibis-headed recorder, watches the beam with his pen lifted. If the heart is heavy with wrongdoing, heavier than truth, the pen does not write a sentence of imprisonment or torment. Egypt's justice was swifter and stranger than that. The heavy heart is given to Amit, and the devourer eats it, and the soul, its heart consumed, simply ceases, unbecomes, dies the second death from which there is no gathering and no return. Annihilation, not hell. The Egyptians did not imagine eternal torture. They imagined, as the price of a false life, eternal absence to be erased from the memory of the universe, unnamed, unfed, unrisen, while the world's great story goes on without you forever. And if the heart balances, if the life weighs level with the feather, then Thoth writes, and his verdict rings through the hall, true of voice, justified. The dead one is Mar-Keher, true of voice, the very title given to Osiris when the tribunal vindicated him against Set. And the whole company of gods repeats it, and Horus himself takes the justified soul by the hand and leads it forward, past the silent devourer, to the foot of the throne. And Osiris, who died and was gathered, who knows from the inside everything this soul has just endured, inclines his green, serene, unspeaking face, and admits his new subject to the kingdom. The gate at the end of the hall opens. Beyond it lies morning, and what was the morning beyond the judgment? What did Egypt promise its justified dead? Here, at the end of the long road, this mythology delivers its most disarming surprise. After the gates and the guardians, the lakes of fire and the trembling scale, after all that cosmic machinery, the paradise of Egypt turns out to be Egypt, the blessed country of the dead, the field of reeds, the field of offerings, Aru they called it, is nothing more and nothing less than the beloved river world itself, perfected, a land of waterways and green fields under a bright sky. The flood always ideal, never too high, never failing, the black earth inexhaustible, the barley growing taller than a man, the emmer heavy-headed and golden, orchards and lotus pools, cool breezes off the water, boats gliding on mirror-still channels, no sickness there, no hunger, no injustice, no death, but otherwise, home. The same fields, the same river light, the same work and rest and festival, washed clean of everything that ever hurt. Other faiths have dreamed heavens of jeweled cities, of clouds and choirs, of release from the world altogether. Egypt looked at its own valley in the gold of a good morning and said, "This, just this, forever, with the sorrow taken out." It may be the most contented vision of eternity any people has ever recorded. A civilization so in love with its land that its idea of heaven was simply never having to leave. The justified dead lived there in their transfigured bodies, young and whole. The texts promise that the lame walk straight in the field of reeds, and the blind see, and every soul is restored to its best self at its best age. They ploughed and sowed and reaped in the wonderful fields. And here Egyptian practicality produced one of its most charming inventions. Since even paradise involved farm work, and since no Egyptian gentleman or lady wished to spend eternity hoeing, the tombs were stocked with little worker figures, the shabtis, small mummiform servants of faience and wood, inscribed with a spell that woke them whenever the dead was called to labour. "O Shabti," says the spell, "if I am summoned to do any work in the realm of the dead, to plough the fields, to fill the channels with water, to carry the sand of the east to the west, you shall say, 'Here I am, I will do it.'" Wealthy burials packed in one for every day of the year, with overseer Shabtis to manage them. A whole eternal workforce the size of a village, sleeping in miniature coffins, waiting to answer the roll call of paradise on their owner's behalf. Eternity, Egypt reasoned, should be enjoyed, and the blessed dead were not sealed away from the living. This is the last tenderness in the picture. The bar bird could fly out of the tomb by day. That is what the book of coming forth by day means. To perch in the sycamore by the family house, to drink at the garden pool, to ride invisible in the prow of a fishing boat. The dead came to the festivals, and the living came to the tombs, picnicking in the chapel courts on feast days, eating and drinking with their departed, as a family whose dinner table death had widened but not broken. Letters to the dead survive, real ones, on bowls and papyrus, left at tomb doors. a widower asking his wife's spirit why she troubles his dreams, a family begging a dead father to take their side in a quarrel over the inheritance, requests for help, for healing, for a good word with the powers below. The dead of Egypt stayed in the family. They had crossed the river, that was all. And the river, as every Egyptian knew, has two banks, and boats go back and forth all day. And one day, not yet, but one day, everyone now standing in the sunlight would make the same crossing, and be met on the western shore by everyone who had gone before, in the green fields where the reeds bend over the water and the light never fails. Let us return now from the country of the dead to the company of the gods, and spend a while among the great powers we have glimpsed only in passing. For the pantheon of Egypt is a world in itself, and some of its inhabitants deserve an unhurried hour of the night, and first among them, the god who has been quietly present in every story we have told, standing at the scales with his pen, healing the poisoned child, mending the torn eye, keeping the minutes of the tribunal of heaven. Thoth, the ibis-headed one, the moon scribe, the mind of the gods. His forms are two, and both are creatures of the river margins. The ibis, the white wading bird with the black, down-curved bill, stepping thoughtfully through the shallows, probing the mud with precise, deliberate strokes that reminded Egypt of a reed pen moving over papyrus. And the baboon, which seems stranger, until you learn that baboons in the wild sit up facing the eastern horizon before dawn, and greet the rising sun with cries and lifted hands. The Egyptians saw in them a natural congregation of worshippers, wise animals saluting the light, and made the great baboon the companion of scribes, squatting serenely above their writing desks in 1,000 statues. Thoth is also the moon, the silver reckoner, the keeper of time's other clock. For while Ra's sun measures the day, the moon's phases measure the month, and Thoth the counter, the calendar keeper, the mathematician of heaven, was its master. His inventions are nothing less than the tools of civilization. It was Thoth, said Egypt, who invented writing itself. The hieroglyphs were the words of the god, given by him to humankind. And with writing, everything writing makes possible, record and law, medicine set down and preserved, the naming and numbering of things, history, poetry, the letter that crosses distance, the scroll that crosses time. He is the patron of every scribe who ever sat cross-legged with a palette. Ancient statues show officials proudly in that pose, the baboon of Thoth perched above their bent heads. He is the reckoner of years who writes the lengths of reigns on the leaves of the sacred Persea tree, the keeper of the divine archive, the author, in later legend, of secret books of wisdom hidden in the deeps of time. And he is the great mediator, in a pantheon of mighty tempers, the blazing eye, the storm brother, the falcon at war. Thoth is the one who reconciles. He cools the raging goddess with wise words and brings her home. He heals the eye of Horus and the wounds of Set alike, restoring each combatant, keeping the cosmic contest from ending in cosmic ruin. At the tribunal he weighs arguments as evenly as he weighs hearts. Where Ma'at is the principle of truth, Thoth is truth's working servant. Truth applied, written down, calculated, spoken at the right moment in the right words. One story shows his subtle power better than any hymn. When Nut the sky was first with child, Ra, jealous of the prophecy of her offspring, laid a curse upon her. She should give birth on no day of the year. And the year, in those times, had only 360 days, and every one was closed to her. So Thoth went to the moon and played draughts with him, game after game, wagering light, and won, each time, a small portion of the moon's radiance. And when he had gathered enough, he shaped his winnings into 5 whole new days and set them outside the year, belonging to no month, beyond the reach of the curse. On those 5 stolen days, the epigomenal days, the days upon the year, Nut brought forth her children, Osiris, the elder Horus, Set, Isis and Nephthys, one on each. Egypt kept those 5 days ever after, as the birthdays of the gods, a strange little festival season outside ordinary time. And if you have ever wondered why the moon looks gnawed and diminished through part of every month, that, said the myth with a smile, is because Thoth won its light at the gaming board, 5 days' worth, to smuggle the great gods into existence past the jealousy of the sun. The cleverest god in Egypt did not defeat the curse. He outthought it. That is Thoth entire, the power that wins not by force, but by intelligence. The quiet, patient, endlessly resourceful mind of the world, standing at the scales of judgment with his pen lifted, missing nothing, recording everything, and always, in the end, finding the way through. If Thoth is the mind of the Egyptian heavens, Hathor is their joy. She is the goddess Egypt loved most warmly and longest, older than most of the pantheon, worshipped from the very dawn of the civilization to its last twilight, and she gathered into herself nearly everything the Egyptians found delightful in being alive: love and beauty, music and dance, wine and perfume, motherhood, the sycamore's shade, the gold of jewelry, and the gold of sunset. They called her the Golden One, the Lady of the Sycamore, the Mistress of Turquoise, the Lady of Drunkenness, and, in one of the loveliest of all divine titles, the Lady of the House of Jubilation. Her forms are gentle ones. Most anciently she is the cow, the great mild mother animal, giver of milk, whose warm flank was the first comfort of humankind. She appears as a beautiful cow crowned with the sun disk between her horns, or as a woman wearing that horned diadem, or as a woman with the soft, wide-set ears of a cow still showing through her human beauty, a face so distinctive that her columns, crowned with that broad, kindly face on all four sides, are recognizable across any temple in Egypt. As the celestial cow she is, the sky itself. We have met her already, carrying the weary sun god on her back into heaven. Her belly is strung with stars, and the sun sails along her flank. She is the mother, or the wife, of Horus. Her very name, Hut-Hor, means the house of Horus, the sheltering sky in which the falcon flies. And at the temple of Dendera, her great house, she was celebrated each year with a festival in which her statue sailed upriver in a golden barge, amid music and rejoicing on both banks, to be reunited with Horus of Edfu in a divine marriage, one of the great joyful pageants of the Egyptian year, part sacrament, part honeymoon, part national holiday. She is the patroness of everything that makes the heart light. Musicians played in her name. Her priestesses shook the sistrum, the sacred rattle whose silvery shimmer was thought to be her very sound, the noise that gladdens gods, and wore her face on the handles. Dancers danced for her, lovers prayed to her, and Egyptian love poetry, some of the tenderest verse of the ancient world, calls on the Golden One to bring the beloved swiftly, to make the meeting sweet. Women in childbirth called her name, and the 7 Hathors attended every cradle like fairy godmothers, pronouncing the child's destiny. Wine and beer were hers. Drunkenness in her honor was not vice but worship, a loosening of the heart toward joy. At her festivals, whole towns, by the accounts, drank and danced and made merry all through the torchlit night. Even the makers of perfume and the miners of turquoise in far Sinai called her mistress. Where other gods demanded awe, Hathor invited delight. Her religion, at its heart, was the conviction, rare and precious in any age, that pleasure, music, beauty, and love are not distractions from the divine, but avenues to it, that the gods are honored not only by solemnity, but by gladness. And yet, Egypt never let its images simplify. This same golden goddess of love is the Eye of Ra, and we have already seen what the eye can become. Hathor and Sekhmet, the dancer and the lioness, the lady of drunkenness and the drinker of blood, are one being in 2 moods, the story of the destruction of humankind, which we heard as the tale of Sekhmet's rage, ends with the lioness soothed by the lake of red beer, and rising as Hathor, gladness restored. The Egyptians understood something deep and unsettling in that identity, that love and wrath are neighbors, that the warmth which nurtures can, provoked, scorch, that the same sun which gilds the fields at morning can kill in the desert noon. They did not resolve the paradox. They celebrated it and managed it. Many of Hathor's joyful festivals of music and drunkenness were, at their root, rites of appeasement, the gladness offered to keep the Golden One golden, the wine poured so the lioness would stay a dancer. Joy, in Egypt, was serious business. It was one of the ways the world was kept safe. Of all the stories told about Isis, the searcher, the mourner, the mother in the marshes, one stands apart, and it belongs here among the portraits of the great powers, for it is the tale of how she became what the texts call her, mistress of magic, mightier than 1,000,000 gods. It is a strange story, a little dark, entirely unsentimental. Egypt did not require its beloved gods to be harmless, and it turns on the deepest principle of Egyptian magic, the power of the name. For the Egyptians, a name was not a label. It was a part of the soul, as real a component of a being as body or shadow. To know a name truly was to hold a handle on its owner's existence. This is why the gates of the underworld demanded to be named, why the damned were punished by the erasure of their names, why pharaohs hammered the names of hated predecessors off the monuments, to unmake them retroactively, and why every god kept, beneath all public titles, one true name, hidden, never spoken, the secret core of their power. And no name in the cosmos was deeper hidden, or more powerful, than the true name of Ra, the eldest light, which he had held unspoken since before the mound rose from the waters. Whoever knew that name would hold power over the sun himself, and therefore over everything the sun sustains. Isis resolved to know it. The texts are serene and matter-of-fact about her motive. She desired to be, in knowledge and power, the equal of the greatest, for herself, and for the sun she would one day set on the throne of the world. And so the wisest of goddesses studied the old sun god as he crossed the sky each day. Aged now, as we have seen him, nodding in his bark, his silver bones weary. And she marked that, like any old man, he drooled, and where his spittle fell upon the earth, she gathered it up. And she kneaded the god's own spittle with clay, and from it she fashioned a serpent, a thing Ra had not made and therefore could not command, and she laid it, lifeless until her spell quickened it, at a crossroads on the sun's daily path. And when Ra came by in his glory, the serpent struck, and bit deep, and the fire of its venom, fire distilled, remember, from the god's own substance, swept through the eldest of beings, and the sun god cried out, and heaven shook. The gods gathered around their stricken king, helpless, for the poison was of his own essence, and none of them had made it, and none could master it. And Isis came, gentle-voiced, the great physician, and said, "Tell me your name, divine father, for a person lives when one recites in their name. Only your true name can anchor the spell that draws this poison." And Ra, in his agony, evaded. He recited his titles, maker of heaven and earth, builder of the mountains, creator of the waters, Khepri in the morning, Ra at noon, Atum in the evening, the whole public splendor of the sun. And the poison burned on, for titles are not the name. Twice he tried, twice the fire rose hotter, and at last, at the extremity, the oldest god yielded. He caused his true name to pass from his own heart into the heart of Isis, hidden even in the telling, for the scribes who wrote this story down did not know it and did not pretend to, on the single condition that she share it with no one but the son to come, Horus, binding him with oaths. And the name passed, heart to heart, in silence. And Isis spoke the great spell, "Flow out, poison, I am Isis, and it is I who conquer." And the fire left the sun, and Ra sailed on, diminished by exactly one secret. The Egyptians drew from this tale, with typical practicality, a healing spell. It was recited over snakebite for centuries, the words of Isis who conquered poison in heaven pressed into service against the vipers of the field. But the story's real gift is its portrait of Isis, completed. The faithful widow, the fugitive mother, the tender nurse of Byblos. She is all of that, and she is also this: the intelligence that outweighted the sun, the will that would not accept a locked door in the universe, power gained not by inheritance or gift, but by patience, observation, audacity, and craft. When the later world came to worship her, and it would, as we shall see, from the cataracts of the Nile to the walls of distant, rainy islands at the edge of the world, it was this whole Isis it adored, the one whose love was stronger than death, and whose mind was equal to the sun, the goddess, as her devotees said, great in magic, whose true strength was that she never, under any sky, gave up. We have walked among thrones and tribunals long enough. Let us step now into an ordinary Egyptian house. Mud brick walls, a shaded courtyard, bread baking, a child asleep on a mat. For religion in Egypt did not live only in the granite temples. It lived at the hearth, and the hearth had its own gods, humbler and stranger, and in their way more beloved than the lords of heaven. For these were the gods a family actually saw every day, painted on the bedpost, carved on the headrest, worn on a cord at the throat of a woman in labor. Chief among them were two of the most curious figures in the whole pantheon, a dancing dwarf and a pregnant hippopotamus, and no tour of Egyptian myth is honest without them. Bes comes first, grinning. He breaks every rule of Egyptian art, where the great god stands slim, serene, and in profile. Bes is squat, bandy-legged, pot-bellied, wild-maned like a lion, tongue stuck out, and he faces you head-on, full frontal, eye to eye, the only figure in the canon who habitually does, because his whole business is confrontation. Bes is a guardian, an apotropaic power, a being whose ugliness is a weapon pointed outward. Demons of the night, fevers, serpents, scorpions, the evil eye, bad dreams. Bes scares them off, capering, roaring, brandishing knives or strangling snakes in his fists, beating his tambourine, making a sacred racket at the threshold, and precisely because he guarded against the terrors of the dark, he became the special protector of the two moments when Egyptians felt most vulnerable to them, sleep and birth. His face grins from headrests. The Egyptians slept with Bez literally under their heads, standing watch over the defenseless hours, and from the walls of birth chambers, from cosmetic jars and mirror handles and children's amulets. He is also, disarmingly, a god of merriment, of music, dancing, and the pleasures of the household. As if Egypt understood that laughter and safety live in the same room, the same little roaring dwarf who frightens the demon delights the child. No temple of state was ever his. His shrine was the doorway, the bedside, the cradle, and when Egyptians abroad missed home, it was often Bez they carried. His impudent, protective grin has been dug up from Spain to Mesopotamia, the pocket god of a civilization, still on duty. Beside him stands Tawet, the Great One, and she is stranger still, a female hippopotamus, upright on lion's feet, heavy-bellied with eternal pregnancy, a crocodile's tail down her back, her mouth open to show the pegs of her teeth. To meet a hippopotamus in the river was among the most dangerous things that could happen to an Egyptian. The great beasts overturned boats and killed more people than crocodiles, and a mother hippopotamus defending her calf was the most dangerous of all. That is exactly the point. Egypt took the river's most formidable maternal fury and enlisted it. Taweret is the rage of the protecting mother, hired for every human childbirth. Her image, fierce and gravid, knife sometimes in paw, stood guard over labor and lying in. Women wore her at the throat and hip through pregnancy. Her form was carved on the magic wands of ivory that midwives laid protectively around mother and newborn. She asked no great temples either. Her worship was need and gratitude at the most dangerous threshold of ancient life, where so many mothers and infants were lost, and where a goddess with a crocodile's tail and a mother's fury seemed exactly the ally one wanted. Around these two gathered the rest of the household's divine company. Renenutet, the cobra goddess of the granary and the harvest, coiled watchfully where the grain was stored. Meskenet, goddess of the birth brick on which women crouched in labor, who pronounced the newborn's fortune. The seven Hathors with their prophecies at the cradle. Shai, destiny itself, apportioning each life its length and luck, and the honored dead of the family, the ancestors, whose small busts stood in wall niches and received flowers and prayers as informal saints. Kin who had crossed the river but not left the household. Every house was a small temple. Every mother, in the hour of birth, a priestess, surrounded by her strange, kind, ferocious congregation of protectors. And this, as much as anything carved at Karnak, is Egyptian religion. Not only the sunboat and the scales of eternity, but a grinning dwarf on a headrest, a hippopotamus at a bedside, a cobra in the granary, the divine woven so tightly into the ordinary that no hour of an Egyptian life, waking or sleeping, ever passed outside the company of the gods. All night our boat has been drifting on the Nile, and it is time we paid our respects to the water itself. For the river that made Egypt was, of course, alive with gods. Not one god, simply, but a company of them, each holding a different aspect of the water's mystery. The flood that arrived like a miracle each summer, the beasts that ruled the currents, the very source from which the waters rose. Let us meet the lords of the river on whose surface we have been travelling all this while. First, the flood. Every year, in the height of summer, mysteriously, for no rain fell in Egypt, the river began to rise. It swelled and reddened with silt, overflowed its banks, and spread across the whole valley in a vast, calm, life-carrying sheet. And when it withdrew weeks later, it left behind a fresh layer of black, fertile mud in which the whole year's food would grow. Egypt called the flood simply the arrival, and personified its abundance as happy, a curious and wonderful figure, a well-fed man with the heavy breasts of a nurse and a belly of prosperous fatness, his head crowned with water plants, his arms laden with offering tables of fish and fowl and sheaves, the pot-bellied wet nurse of the whole nation, male and mothering at once, because the flood both begets and nurses the land. Hymns to Happy are among Egypt's most exuberant poetry. When he rises, the land leaps for joy, every belly is glad, every back laughs, every tooth grinds, and when he is sluggish, when the flood fails, the hymns darken. Millions perish, the noble looks like the pauper, and all Egypt learns in a single dry season that its life hangs by a river's mood. No temples of state were built to Happy, and no city claimed him. He was worshipped where he lived, at the riverside, with offerings cast into the water at the rising. For how do you house a god whose body is the whole flood? Then, the crocodile. No creature of the river commanded more fear. And so, by the deep Egyptian logic we have already seen with jackals and hippopotami, none was more thoroughly made into a god. Subek, the crocodile lord, a man with the long-jawed head of the beast, or the beast itself, crowned and worshipped. He was the river's raw power, its ambush, its sudden death, but also its potency and protection, for the same jaws that threatened fishermen guarded the waters against worse things. In the oldest texts, Sobek is a fierce ally of the sun, seizing the enemies of light in his teeth. His worship flourished wherever crocodiles did, above all in the lake country of the Fayum and at Komombo in the south, where his temple still stands sharing its courts, half and half, with Horus. And at his cult centers the priests kept actual sacred crocodiles, pampered beasts adorned with gold rings in their ears and bracelets on their forelegs, hand-fed on honey cakes and roasted meat, dozing on temple sand as the living images of the god, and when they died they were mummified with full honors, and pilgrims came away awed at a civilization that could look the river's deadliest creature in its ancient eye and call it holy. And at the river's own source, for every Egyptian knew the Nile rose from a cavern in the deep south, at the islands of the first cataract, sat the oldest craftsman of all, Khnum, the ram-headed potter. Khnum presided over the caverns from which the flood burst forth, but his greater work was quieter. At his potter's wheel, the myths said, Khnum shaped every living thing. He threw the bodies of gods and of humans on the wheel as a potter throws a vessel, forming each child in clay before it quickened in its mother. Temple reliefs show him at the wheel shaping a royal child, and its car, its double, side by side, his ram's head bent over the work with a craftsman's absorption. Every human being, in this telling, is thrown on the wheel of Khnum, handmade, individually, by a god who works in river clay, and the great hymn of his temple at Esna follows his craftsmanship into the body itself, with loving anatomical wonder. He knotted the flow of the blood to the bones, it sings. He made the windpipe to breathe, the heart to beat, the tongue to speak. He shaped humankind on the wheel, and not humankind only, for the hymn widens to the whole breathing world. He made birds and fishes, cattle and creeping things. All things came forth from his wheel. It is Egypt's tenderest image of creation. Not a word of command, not a battle with chaos, but a potter at his wheel by the source of the river, turning, shaping every life that has ever been with wet, patient, careful hands. Now we must climb from the river to the throne, for no account of Egypt's gods is complete without the strangest member of the pantheon. The one god every Egyptian had actually seen, or might see, born in gold through the streets on a festival day, the pharaoh. The king of Egypt was not merely a ruler favored by heaven, as kings elsewhere claimed to be. He was, in the full sense of Egyptian theology, a god on earth, the hinge on which the divine and human worlds turned, and the whole vast edifice of Egyptian civilization, its temples and its order and its 3,000 years of continuity, rested on that single audacious idea. The theology was precise, and every piece of it flows from myths we have already heard. The living king was Horus, not merely like Horus, but the falcon god present in the world, each king in succession the same divine kingship wearing a new face. His oldest royal name was written inside a palace facade topped by the perched falcon. He was also the son of Ra, bodily child of the sun. The temple walls show the sun god visiting the queen to father each new king, and when a pharaoh died, the identities rotated with perfect mythic logic. The dead king became Osiris, lord of the west, and his son and successor became Horus in his place, so that every royal funeral reenacted the great myth entire, the son burying the father as Horus buried Osiris, avenging him against death itself by the rites, and taking up the falcon's throne. The succession of the pharaohs was the myth of Osiris and Horus, performed again and again, reign after reign, for 3 millennia. History itself shaped into liturgy, and the king's job description was written in the same theology. His one essential task, proclaimed in identical words for 30 centuries, was to establish Ma'at and drive out Isfet, to do on earth what Re does in the cosmos, hold back chaos, keep the order, feed the gods, defend the borders, judge justly, make the offerings. In principle, the pharaoh was the sole priest of every temple in Egypt. Every offering in every sanctuary from the delta to the cataracts was made in his name by priests standing in for him, and the reliefs on every temple wall show the king alone, face to face with the gods, presenting bread and wine, and the little seated figure of Maat herself. He was the great intercessor. Through his single person, the gods' blessings flowed down to Egypt. The flood in its season, the harvest, victory, order, and humanity's offerings and devotion flowed up. When Egyptians spoke of the king smiting the enemies of Egypt, the pose carved on every temple gateway, the mace lifted over the captive, they were not only recording battles, they were showing Horus subduing Set, order pinning down chaos, in the permanent present tense of ritual. And yet the Egyptians were not naive. They knew the difference between the office and the man. Kings could be old, weak, foolish. There were usurpers and failures. A wry ancient text even advises hard-headedly on serving imperfect masters. The king's body was mortal. It was the kingship in him that was divine, the falcon that alights on each successive perch. When a good king died and the falcon flew to a new perch, Egypt grieved and rejoiced in the same breath. Osiris has gone to his horizon. Horus is arisen upon the throne. The god was dead. The god lived. The world went on, which was, after all, the whole Egyptian creed in a single ceremony. If the pharaoh was the hinge between worlds, the temples were the hinge's great housings, and we should walk through one now, in the cool of our imagined night, because an Egyptian temple was not what later ages mean by a house of worship. It was not a hall for congregations. Ordinary people never entered its inner rooms at all. It was, in the most literal sense the Egyptians could contrive, a house of the god, a palace where a divine being actually resided, was awakened, washed, clothed, fed, entertained, and put to rest every single day, forever. And at the same time it was a machine for maintaining the universe, a model of the cosmos in stone, whose daily rituals helped keep the sun rising and the flood returning. Egypt's temples were the largest religious buildings the ancient world ever raised, and every stone of them was doing theology. Walk the axis, and you walk the myth of creation. The outermost gateway, the pylon, two mountainous towers of stone flanking the door, is the horizon itself, the twin peaks between which the sun rises. Its face is carved with the king smiting chaos, so that you enter the ordered world through an image of disorder defeated. Beyond it, an open court full of light. Then a hall of columns, and the columns are a stone marsh, their shafts bundled reeds and lotus and papyrus stems, their capitals open flowers, the ceiling above painted with stars. You are wading through the primeval thicket at the dawn of the world, the marsh of the first morning, and as you go deeper, the floor rises gently under your feet, and the ceilings lower, and the light dims, passing from sunlit court through dusky hall into deepening dark, until at the heart of the building, at its highest point and its blackest, you reach a small chamber holding a shrine of stone or gilded wood, the sanctuary. It stands on the highest ground because it is the primeval mound itself, the first hill that rose from the waters, recreated in the architecture. Every Egyptian temple is a map of the beginning, and the god dwells at the point where the world began. Inside the shrine stands the cult image, often surprisingly small, a figure of gold and precious stone, which was not, the priests would carefully say, the god himself, but a body the god could inhabit, a golden perch onto which the divine bar would descend like a bird, so that heaven could be visited, tended, and fed at a fixed address on earth. And tended it was, with a devotion that never once lapsed, in the great temples, for thousands of years. Every morning before dawn, the officiating priest, purified, shaven, linen-clad, broke the clay seal on the sanctuary doors and opened them as the sun rose, waking the god with hymns. Awake in peace, great God, awake in peace. The image was lifted out, undressed of yesterday's linen, washed, anointed with perfumed oils, dressed in fresh cloth of 4 colors, adorned with its crowns and jewels, its eyes painted. The god groomed each dawn like a king at his levee, and then breakfast was served. Bread, beer, roasted meats, fruit, wine, water, flowers, incense, laid out in abundance before the shrine. The god consumed the invisible essence. The visible food then reverted. Reverted is the technical term of the temple accounts, to the priests as their wages, divine leftovers feeding the whole staff of the god's house. At midday and evening the service is repeated in lesser form. At night the shrine was sealed again, the priest backing out sweeping away his own footprints, and the god slept, while on the temple roof, in some houses, astronomer priests watched the stars in their courses, keeping the hours as their god sailed the hidden river below the world. Around this daily heartbeat, the temple was a whole world in motion, storehouses and granaries holding the wealth of vast estates, a sacred lake for purifications, its still water doubling the stars, workshops, bakeries, breweries, schools of scribes, and the house of life, the temple's scriptorium and library, where the sacred books were copied, medicine and astronomy studied, dreams interpreted, the closest thing the ancient world had to a research institute. Humming quietly in the god's shadow, hundreds, sometimes thousands, served a great temple in rotating watches, most of them ordinary men of the town, priests for 1 month in 4, purifying themselves, shaving their bodies, abstaining and serving, then returning to their farms and families with the god's bread in their satchels. The people of Egypt might never pass the inner doors, but the temple's order radiated outward into every life, its rituals keeping cosmic time, its granaries steadying the years, its festivals, as we shall now see, throwing the god's house open in the one way that mattered most, by bringing the god out, in gold, onto the river, among the people, in joy. And before the pylons of the greatest temples stood the building's exclamation marks, the obelisks, single needles of granite, four-sided, tapering, crowned with a small pyramid of gold or gilded bronze. Each was one stone, quarried in the south as a single piece, some of them heavier than 200 elephants, floated down the river on barges built for nothing else, and raised by earthen ramps and prayer to stand at the doors of the gods. Their form told the old story yet again. The little pyramid at the tip was the Ben, the stone of the first sunrise, lifted as high into the sky as human beings could lift it, and the gilded point was placed there to do one thing, to catch the first ray of dawn before the light reached anything else on earth, so that every morning the temple's needle kindled first, a spark of returning sun announcing to the sleeping town that Ra had come safely through the night once more. The shafts were carved with the names of kings praising the sun, and the sun rewarded them with a strange immortality. Obelisks proved so portable an awe that later empires carried them away as trophies, and the needles of Egypt now stand at the hearts of cities their makers never imagined, watching traffic circle in Rome and Paris, Istanbul and London and New York, still catching the first light, still doing their single ancient job at the doors of very different temples. For most Egyptians, on most days, the god dwelt behind walls, glimpsed only as incense smoke rising from the temple roofs. But the Egyptian year was strung with festivals like beads on a cord. The calendars carved at the great temples list dozens upon dozens, and on those days everything reversed. The doors opened, the god came out, and religion poured into the streets and onto the river in processions of gold, music, feasting, and holy uproar. The festivals were Egypt's holy days and holidays at once. The words are kin for good reasons, and through them the whole population, farmer and fisherwoman and child, met their gods face to face. The heart of every great festival was the procession of the sacred bark. The god's image was lifted from the sanctuary into a portable boat shrine, a gilded Nile boat in miniature, its cabin veiled, its prow and stern crowned with the god's emblem, and borne out of the temple on the shoulders of shaven priests, swaying down the avenues of sphinxes through crowds who might wait a lifetime for a good view. Musicians went before it, sistra shimmering, drums, trumpets, clapping priestesses. Incense clouded the air, dancers turned, soldiers and standards, and the king himself, when he was present, walked in the god's train. And because the boat was a boat, the greatest processions took to the water. The bark shrine was carried aboard a true river barge sheathed in gold, and towed along the Nile between banks lined with rejoicing Egypt, the god sailing his own river through his own people, as Ra sails the sky. 2 festivals of Thebes show the pattern at its grandest. At the Opet festival, in the 2nd month of the flood, Amun of Karnak sailed upriver to visit his southern sanctuary at Luxor Temple, the god processing in golden state to renew, in the inner rooms, the divine energies of kingship itself. The reigning pharaoh entered with him, and emerged renewed, recharged with the royal car, almost recrowned, and for the days of the feast, which swelled over the centuries from 11 days to nearly a month, Thebes ate and drank at the temple's expense, the accounts recording thousands of loaves and jars of beer distributed to the crowds. And in the beautiful festival of the valley, Amun crossed the river westward, to the desert edge where the dead were buried, and the whole city crossed with him. For this was Egypt's feast of the dead, kept not in mourning but in reunion. Families went out to the tomb chapels of their ancestors and held banquets there through the night, eating and drinking and singing with their dead in the lamplight, the West Bank glittering with 1,000 small feasts as the god's golden bark moved among the temples of the departed kings. Few images catch the Egyptian heart so completely. Death's country lit up like a fairground, the living dining with the beloved dead, and the great gods sailing overhead through the night to bless the whole undivided family of Egypt, on both banks of being. And the festivals had their unrulier joys too. At Bubastis in the delta, the feast of the cat goddess Bastet drew, if the accounts are to be believed, hundreds of thousands, arriving by riverboat in flotillas of music and mischief. More wine, the writers say, was drunk in those days than in all the rest of the year. The festivals of Hathor were nights of sanctioned drunkenness and dancing by torchlight, gladness offered to keep the Golden One gentle. Even solemn Abydos, the holy city of Osiris, held a great yearly passion play, the oldest theatre we know of, in which the god's story was performed. The procession of Osiris going out in glory, the attack of the enemies of Set, fought off in a ritual melee by the crowd itself, pilgrims scuffling gleefully in the sacred cause, the mourning, the vindication, the return in triumph. Ordinary Egyptians saved for years to make the pilgrimage and take a part, or set up a small stone by the processional way so that their name might stand forever in the audience of the god's eternal drama. Oracles, too, belonged to festival days. As the bark swayed past on the priest's shoulders, petitioners cried out their questions. Shall I recover? Is the ox mine by right? Who stole the linen? And the god answered by the boat's movements, dipping toward a written petition for yes, backing away for no. Village juries deferred to it. The swaying gold on the shoulders of sweating men was, for the crowd pressing close, the very nod of heaven. Then the feast ended. The god sailed home. The doors closed on the dark sweet rooms, and ordinary time resumed, already leaning toward the next bead on the year's bright string, and the year itself began with the greatest arrival of all. New Year's Day, Wepet Renpet, the opening of the year, came with the dawn rising of the star of Isis and the first swelling of the flood, star, goddess, and river keeping their triple appointment, the whole cosmos audibly turning over. The 5 strange days just before it, the days outside the year that Thoth had won at the gaming board, the birthdays of Osiris and Isis and their kin, were held to be perilous, a gap in ordered time when the demons of the old year prowled. People wore amulets, recited protective litanies, and lay low until the danger passed. Then the new sun of the new year rose, and Egypt breathed out and feasted. At Dendera, the temple of Hathor performed the year's most beautiful single ceremony. On New Year's morning, the priests carried the golden statue of the goddess up the temple's hidden staircase. The walls of the stair are carved with the procession, so the climb itself is frozen in stone forever. Out onto the roof, to a kiosk open to the sky. And there, as the sun of the new year climbed the horizon, its first rays fell full upon the face of the goddess. They called it the union with the disk, the Lady of Joy and the returning light meeting face to face on the rooftop. The statue recharged with a year's worth of radiance, while the crowds rejoiced below. It is all of Egyptian festival in one image. The god brought out of the dark to meet the light, heaven and earth touching on a temple roof, and the new year beginning, officially, with a kiss of sunlight. There is a thread that has run through every story we have told tonight. Through the creation spoken by Ptah's tongue, the spells of the underworld gates, the healing of the poisoned child, the theft of the sun's name, and it is time to draw it into the light. The Egyptians called it Heka, magic, but magic in a sense far grander and more respectable than the word now carries. Heka was not superstition at the edges of religion. It was a fundamental force of the cosmos, older than the gods, the very energy by which creation happened and keeps happening. And it was, the Egyptians said serenely, given by the Creator to humankind as a gift, a weapon to ward off the blows of events. To understand Egypt, one must understand that in Egypt, magic was not the rival of religion. It was religion's oldest tool. Heka was there before anything else. The Creator used Heka to think and speak the world into being. The texts personify it as a god, Heka himself, who stands in the sunboat among the crew, and who says in one startling passage, "I am he whom the Lord of all made, before duality had yet come into being," the power of creation itself, older than the distinction between any two things. Every god worked through Heka. Isis was its greatest mistress among the gods, Thoth its great scholar, and human beings could work through it too, for the words and images that carried Heka were learnable. This is the deep logic of everything we have seen, why the Book of the Dead works, why knowing a name gives power, why the story of Horus's healing cures a scorpion sting, Words, in Egyptian understanding, do not merely describe reality. Rightly spoken, with the right knowledge, purity, and force, they participate in it, as the Creator's own words did on the first morning. Every spell was a small act of creation, a borrowing of the original power that raised the mound from the waters. The professionals of Heka were, tellingly, priests, above all the lector priests of the temple's house of life, the masters of the sacred books, whom Egyptian stories depict as the great magicians, men who could read the encrypted writings, part waters, animate wax figures, and read what is in men's hearts. Village practitioners, scorpion charmers, wise women, healers, carried the same craft at humbler levels, and the tools of the craft survive in their thousands, spells written on papyrus and dissolved in beer to be drunk, so the patient swallowed the words themselves. Ivory wands carved with processions of protective demons, laid around sleeping children, their tips worn from being dragged in protective circles on the floor, and the healing statues, figures of Horus the child mastering the dangerous beasts, standing on crocodiles, gripping serpents and scorpions harmless in his fists, every inch of the stone crawling with inscribed spells. Water was poured over the statue, ran across the words, absorbed them, and was drunk or applied by the sufferer. Liquid scripture, the story of the healed child administered like medicine, myth taken by mouth. Medicine itself and magic were one continuous art. The great medical papyri, sober, observational, in places startlingly clinical, mix careful diagnoses and herbal prescriptions with incantations and see no seam between them. The drug attacked the ailment's substance, the spell attacked its cause. For serious illness, in a world before germs were dreamed of, was reasonably ascribed to hostile spirits, angry dead, or the malice of demons, and one fought such enemies with the weapons that worked on them. Words of power. A remedy might end its careful recipe with the note truly effective, 1,000,000 times, the ancient equivalent of clinical confidence, and Heka could be turned to the state's own defense. The temples performed great standing rituals of protection in which the enemies of the sun, above all the serpent Apophis, were made in wax, named in writing, and then spat upon, trampled, stabbed, and melted in fire, hour by hour, so that the cosmic enemy was being ritually destroyed somewhere in Egypt at every moment of the day and night, a perpetual magical artillery keeping the boat of Ra safe by proxy. Even curses and love charms and the darker private magics existed, as they do everywhere. The state prosecuted at least one great sorcery conspiracy in the royal harem, but the overwhelming mass of Egyptian magic was protective, healing, hopeful. A mother's spell over a feverish child, spoken at night, addressing the darkness with the accumulated authority of the myths. Flow out, poison. The child of Isis was healed, and so shall this child be healed. Heka was, in the end, the Egyptians' name for the conviction that the universe answers to meaning, that the same power which spoke the world can be spoken again, in a small room, over a small bed, against the dark. Every visitor to Egypt in ancient times remarked on it, often with astonishment. No people on earth so honored animals. Gods with the heads of falcons and jackals and lionesses, temples keeping pampered sacred beasts, whole cemeteries, millions upon millions of carefully mummified creatures, cats and ibises, hawks and crocodiles, rams and bulls, wrapped and coffined like people. Later ages sometimes mocked Egypt for it, and thoroughly misunderstood. The Egyptians did not worship animals, they read them, as living hieroglyphs, visible letters in which divine powers spelled themselves out in the world. And their so-called animal worship was really a profound theological idea, that the sacred shows itself through the natures of living things. The logic is easy to feel once it is pointed out. What is a falcon? A being of the highest sky, keen-eyed beyond human sight, stooping like a thunderbolt, the visible nature of Horus. What is a jackal? The unerring pathfinder of the desert margins, moving sure-footed in the dark where humans are lost. The nature of Anubis, guide of souls. The lioness's ferocity is Sekhmet's. The cow's patient nurture is Hathor's. The ibis, probing the mud with pen-stroke precision, writes Thoth into the landscape. The scarab, rolling its sphere and rising newborn from it, is the resurrection of the sun performed daily in the dust of the road. A god with an animal's head is not a monster but a sentence. The human form says person, presence, addressability. The animal head says, and this is the nature of the power you are addressing. Egypt's theology was written in zoology. From reading the natures, it was a short step to honoring the exemplars. At many temples, a single living animal was kept as the earthly vessel of the god, chosen by its markings, installed in state, and consulted as an oracle. Greatest of these was the Apis bull of Memphis, a black bull with precise sacred markings, a white diamond on the brow, an eagle shape on the back, sought through all Egypt when its predecessor died, enthroned in its own court beside the temple of Ptah, adored in life, and at death mourned like a king, embalmed in giant alabaster vats, and entombed in colossal granite sarcophagi in the underground galleries of the Serapeum, where the vaults, rediscovered in modern times, run for hundreds of meters, bull after bull, dynasty after dynasty, one of the most awe-inspiring burial places of the ancient world. The Apis was Ptah's herald and living bar, and pilgrims put their questions to it, reading yes and no in which chamber it entered, its bellowing, its breath. And then there were the animals of the people. In the later centuries of Egyptian religion, a great tide of popular piety expressed itself through votive animal mummies. A pilgrim to the temple of Thoth would purchase an ibis, mummified and beautifully wrapped, and dedicate it. A prayer made flesh, a message-bearer sent to the god in his own script. A devotee of Bastet dedicated a cat, of Horus a hawk, of Sobek a young crocodile. The temples ran breeding farms to meet the demand, and the scale beggars belief. The ibis galleries at one site alone held mummified birds by the million. The cat cemeteries of Bubastis were mined in modern times, unforgivably, by the shipload. Whatever one thinks of the industry, the devotion behind it was real and tender. Each little bundled body carried someone's plea for a child's health, a lawsuit, a safe journey into the god's presence, where it would go on praying forever. Cats, above all, were beloved past all reckoning. The household cat was Bastet's own creature, guardian against serpents and vermin. Families mourned a cat's death, the old accounts say, by shaving their eyebrows, and killing one, even by accident, was in the later ages mortally dangerous, crowds taking justice into their own hands. Egypt's tenderness toward the animal world, the sacred crocodile with gold in its ears, the ibis on the temple pool, the cat in the coffin small as a loaf, was of a piece with everything else in its religion. The divine was not elsewhere. It padded through the courtyard, waded in the shallows, and purred at the foot of the bed. The whole breathing world was one great temple, and every creature in it a word in the speech of the gods. We have seen the gods of the state, and the gods of the hearth, the festivals and the temples and the magic. Let us close our long tour of living religion with the most precious evidence of all, the traces of what ordinary Egyptians actually felt. It is the hardest thing to recover from any ancient world. Not what the priests prescribed, but what the farmer prayed at dusk. Not the theology, but the heart. And Egypt, because it wrote so much and its sands preserve so well, lets us hear those hearts with a clarity almost unbearable across the distance of millennia. We can hear them best in a village of tomb builders in the desert hills of the West, the community of craftsmen who cut and painted the royal tombs, and who left behind, along with their work, an unmatched archive of their own small lives, their letters, their laundry lists, their lawsuits, and their prayers. On stones set up in their little chapels, these workmen wrote directly to the gods, and what they wrote is personal piety of a depth and humility the official texts never show. One draftsman, struck blind, as he believed, for swearing a false oath by the moon god, set up a stone confessing it. I am the man who swore falsely by Ptah, Lord of Truth, and he made me see darkness by day. Beware of Ptah, Lord of Truth, he inscribed, turning his own affliction into a warning sermon for passers-by. And then, the plea. He was merciful to me before, he will be merciful again. Another writes to Amun, as the poor man's protector. Amun, lend your ear to one who stands alone in the court, who is poor while his enemy is rich. The poor man's cry surrounds you. Amun, vizier of the humble. These are not courtly formulas. They are the voices of individual souls, guilty, hopeful, aggrieved, grateful, speaking to gods they experienced as persons, near, watchful, capable of anger, and, above all, capable of mercy. Daily devotion was woven through ordinary routines. Households kept small shrines in a wall niche, a figure of Bes or a stealer of the family's chosen god, the ancestors' busts beside it, where a lamp was lit and bread offered. The first act of many a morning was a libation and a short prayer at the house shrine, as natural as sweeping the step. People bore theophoric names: Amenhotep, Amun is content, Meritaten, beloved of Aten, Paidies, the gift of Isis, so that every roll call in Egypt was a litany, and to speak a friend's name was to name a god's kindness. Travellers scratched prayers on the rocks of desert roads, sailors invoked Hathor of the fair wind, scribes spilled a drop of water from their pot for Thoth before writing. Oracles, as we saw, settled disputes at festivals, and beyond them people sought the gods in dreams, sleeping in temple precincts in hope of a divine visitation, consulting the dream books that catalogued what it meant to see oneself eating crocodile flesh. Good, it means becoming an official, or looking into a deep well. Bad, prison. The line between religion and daily prudence hardly existed. The gods were part of how one navigated a week, and when the gods seemed silent, Egyptians said so. This too survives. The harpers' songs sung at banquets could turn suddenly, startlingly skeptical. None comes back from beyond to tell us how the dead fare, sings one, so make holiday today, and do not weary of it. A shiver of doubt in the midst of the most afterlife-assured civilization in history. Other voices answer elsewhere with reaffirmed faith. The argument itself is the point. These were not people mechanically performing a state cult, but men and women thinking, doubting, trusting, bargaining and hoping, with the gods as real presences in the argument. Perhaps the truest single window is the humblest kind of object Egypt has left us, the votive ear stelae, small stones carved simply with human ears, sometimes dozens of them, dedicated at temples so that the god would hear better. Some are inscribed to Ptah, hearer of prayers. A poor worshipper, who could not afford a statue or a stela with a long text, bought a little stone with 2 carved ears on it and left it against the temple wall, a plea reduced to its absolute essence. Listen to me. 3,000 years later, in museum cases, the ears are still listening, and if the long history of human devotion has a more direct or more moving artifact, it would be hard to name. Lean back now, in our drifting boat, and look up. For we have spent hours in the underworld and the temple, and all the while, over our heads, the other half of the Egyptian cosmos has been shining. The night sky of Egypt, in that world without any light but lamp and star, was overwhelming, a black vault crowded with brilliance, the Milky Way a broad glowing river, and the Egyptians, who read everything, read the sky most lovingly of all. It was, we know already, a goddess. Nut, arched over the earth, her body strung with stars. But the Egyptians went further, and made the sky a story that happened twice a day, forever. For Nut, they said, swallows the sun. Every evening, when Ra's boat reaches the western horizon, the sky goddess bends down her face and takes the sun into her mouth. All night long the sun travels hidden through her body. This was one more way of picturing the night journey, layered gently over the duat and the serpent, without any sense of contradiction, and at dawn she gives birth to him again in the east, newborn and red as any newborn, the morning sky flushed like blood-streaked birth waters. The sun's mother is the sky itself, and every day is literally a life, born of Nut at dawn, dying into her mouth at dusk, gestating through the dark, born again. On the ceilings of royal tombs she stretches full length, twice evening and morning, swallowing and bearing the little red disc, and on the inside of coffin lids, through all the later ages, Nut was painted at full length face down over the dead, so that every Egyptian was buried lying in the embrace of the sky, positioned as the sun is positioned in the night, within the goddess, waiting for morning. Few civilizations have found a gentler image for a coffin lid, not a door closing, but a mother's body over a sleeping child, with dawn scheduled. And the stars themselves were souls and gods and clocks, the circumpolar stars of the far north, the ones that in Egypt's latitude never rise or set, wheeling forever around the pole without ever sinking below the horizon. The Egyptians called the imperishable ones, the stars that do not know death, and from the age of the pyramids onward, the blessed dead hoped to join them, to become an imperishable star, beyond setting, beyond weariness, keeping eternal station in the northern sky. The pyramid corridors of the old kings aim north at those very stars, stone launch ramps toward imperishability. Southward, the great constellation the Egyptians called Sa, our Orion, strode the sky as the celestial form of Osiris himself, and rising just before him came the brightest star of all, Sopdet, Sirius, the star of Isis, following her husband across the heaven as she followed him across the world. And Sirius kept Egypt's greatest appointment, after 70 days hidden in the sun's glare. 70 days, the exact canonical span of embalming, the star mummified in light. It rose again just before dawn, blazing in the east, and its return each year came, with breathtaking regularity, at the very season the Nile began to rise. The star of Isis reappeared, and the flood came, heaven visibly triggering the renewal of the earth, the goddess in the sky summoning the water for her husband, the fertile land, the whole national miracle punctual as an astronomer's table. Egypt set its calendar by that rising. The year began when Isis blazed at dawn and the river answered. Priests on temple roofs tracked the Deccan stars in bands across the night to tell the hours. Star tables were painted inside coffin lids so the dead could keep time in eternity. Sky and river, star and flood, goddess above and god below. The Egyptian cosmos was a single working mechanism of love and light, and the night sky over our little boat is its face. Nut arched glittering from horizon to horizon, Orion Osiris striding the south, Sirius Isis at his heel, the imperishables wheeling calmly at the pole. The whole family of the myths hung overhead, keeping perfect time, and one light in the night sky carried a story all its own. The moon, waxing, waning, vanishing, returning, was many things to Egypt, the silver boat of Thoth, keeping the reckoning of months, but it was also, and most movingly, the left eye of Horus, the very eye torn to pieces by Set in the Great War, and made whole again by the wisdom of Thoth. Each month, the Egyptians said, the injury and the healing are performed again in the sky for everyone to see. The eye is whittled away night by night as the moon wanes, the old wound reopening, until it vanishes into darkness, and then, sliver by sliver, Thoth restores it, filling the eye through the waxing nights until it stands full and perfect. The wedge at whole again, the sound eye shining. The month itself was thus a healing, endlessly repeated. Lunar festivals marked the eye's completion, and when eclipses came and the full eye darkened unnaturally, Egypt read the terror plainly, the forces of chaos gulping at the eye of heaven, and the temples answered with spells and clamour until the light was given back. Even the dark of the moon, then, was not an absence but a stage of the story, the sky's monthly reminder that in this cosmos what is broken is not discarded, it is repaired, on schedule, in public, forever. We cannot spend this night in Egypt and not stand, at least once, before the pyramids, the most famous objects the civilization ever made, and among the most famous humankind has ever made. But let us stand before them as Egyptians, not as tourists. For the pyramids are not mysteries in the modern, breathless sense. They are theology. Everything we have learnt tonight, expressed in several million blocks of limestone, the myths of creation and resurrection, built at the largest scale the ancient world ever attempted. Seen from inside the religion, the pyramid explains itself. Its shape is the first clue, and by now we can read it at sight. The pyramid is the primeval mound, the first hill that rose from the waters of Nun, on which the Creator stood and the world began, rendered in geometry and made permanent. To bury the king inside a man-made mound of creation was to place his death at the exact point where existence itself first defeated non-existence, where better to launch a resurrection, and the pyramid is equally a thing of light. Its sloping faces are the slanting rays of the sun descending, built in stone, stand west of the pyramids at certain hours, and the sun's beams fan down through haze at just the pyramid's angle, a pyramid of light in the sky above its stone echo, and the king was to ascend those petrified sunbeams to join his father Ra in the great boat, the very capstone. The little pyramid that crowned the whole, the Ben, bore the name of the sacred stone of the sun temple at Heliopolis, the stone of the first sunrise on which the light bird alighted at creation. Mound of the beginning, staircase of sunlight, gleaming white-cased and gold-tipped at the desert edge. The pyramid was a machine for eternity, a resurrection engine with a king inside, and we do not have to guess, because the later pyramids speak. Carved column after column inside their chambers run the pyramid texts, the oldest large body of religious writing on earth, which we met at the start of our night, and they are one long, urgent, magnificent launch sequence for the king's soul. "O king," they cry, "you have not gone away dead, you have gone away alive. The sky's door is opened for you." The king ascends on the ladder of the sun. He flies up as a falcon, alights as a scarab. He becomes an imperishable star in the north of the sky. The very gods lift him into the boat of Ra, where he takes his seat among the crew of light. Every theme of our night is already there, 4,500 years ago, at full power. The king is Osiris, Osiris Unus, the texts call him. The god's name grafted onto the man's, the first time in history we can watch that great equation being written. And as Osiris died and rose, the dead king rises, and Nut, the Sky Mother, is called to spread herself over him and enfold him among the stars. The pyramid, the texts, the mound, the sunbeam, the falcon flight, the starry mother. One integrated theology of resurrection, complete at the very dawn of recorded religion, so complete that everything Egypt believed for the next 25 centuries reads, in a real sense, as commentary. Around the Great Pyramid spread its working parts, the mortuary temple against its eastern face, where the dead king's cult was fed daily like any gods, the covered causeway running down to the valley temple at the water's edge, where the body had arrived by boat, and, most movingly, the boats themselves, full-sized river vessels of cedar, buried in pits beside the pyramid, disassembled or whole, waiting. One of them, lifted from its pit in modern times and rebuilt plank by plank, stands today beside the Great Pyramid, a real ship, elegant as a swan, 43 meters of Lebanese cedar sewn with rope, the oldest intact ship in existence, parked at the foot of the Mountain of the Sun for a king who expected, quite literally, to sail. Nothing says Egypt more completely. The grandest tomb on earth, and beside it, ready, a boat. Because death, whatever else it was a journey on water, and no Egyptian, not even a god-king armored in 6 million tons of limestone, would dream of setting out without one. 3,000 years is a long time, and even Egypt's serene theology had its earthquake. Once, for one strange generation near the height of the empire, a king arose who looked at the whole immense, ancient, glittering world of the gods we have wandered through tonight, and abolished it. The temples closed, the festivals ceased, the very names of the gods were hacked from the monuments, and Egypt was commanded to worship one god only, the visible disk of the sun. It is the first documented religious revolution in human history, and it is one of history's most astonishing episodes. The pharaoh Akhenaten, the heretic of the sun. He began as Amenhotep IV, son of a magnificent father, heir to Egypt at its imperial zenith, when Amun-Ra of Thebes, king of the gods, stood at the summit of the pantheon, his temples wealthy beyond all reckoning. And within a few years of taking the throne, the young king turned Egypt upside down, his devotion fixed upon the Aten, the sun's disk itself, the pure visible radiance, an old and minor way of speaking about the sun now raised to totality. He changed his name from Amenhotep, a Munis content, to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, a renunciation and a manifesto in a single word. He built vast new open-air temples where worship happened not in the sacred dark, but under the blazing sky. And then he left Thebes altogether and founded a new capital on virgin desert, Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten, a whole city raised at speed in the middle of Egypt, dedicated to the one god, its boundary stones carved with the king's oath never to leave. And from there the revolution hardened. The temples of Amun were shut, their priesthoods dispossessed. Agents went through the land chiseling out the name of Amun wherever it stood, from temple walls, from tomb doors, from the tips of obelisks, even from his own father's names, and eventually the plural word gods itself was attacked. Egypt, the most god-crowded land on earth, was to have one. The theology of the revolution survives in its own words, in the great hymn to the Aten found in a courtier's tomb. And it is beautiful, one of the summits of ancient religious poetry. It praises the sole god whose rays embrace every land, who makes the chick cry in the egg and gives it breath, who sets every man in his place, makes the Nile in the sky, the rain, for foreign peoples, and the Nile from the deep for Egypt, who is mother and father of all he has made, the whole living world unfolding each dawn like a field of flowers under a single loving light. Read on its own, the hymn feels startlingly close to later faiths, sole creator, universal care, and Akhenaten has been called the first monotheist. But notice, too, what the new faith deleted. In all the hymn's radiance there is no Osiris, no judgment, no field of reeds. The dead, in Akhenaten's system, had no green kingdom in the west. They were to sleep by night and come out by day, as spirits basking in the Aten's temples. No Isis, no mourning and finding, no mother in the marshes, no bees at the bedside, no towerette at the birth brick, no stories at all. And access to the one god ran through one mediator only, the king. The Aten shone on everyone, but he spoke, the doctrine insisted, only to Akhenaten. A single god, a single prophet king, a single city. The whole warm, crowded, ancient household of Egyptian religion, replaced by one disk, one radiance, and one royal family basking in it, their strange elongated portraits. The king with his dreamlike face, Queen Nefertiti of the immortal beauty, their small daughters on their laps, raising their hands into the descending rays, each ray ending in a tiny hand touching them alone. It did not survive him. It seems never to have taken root beyond the court. In the workmen's houses of the Aten's own city, archaeologists found Bez on the walls and Tawarit at the thresholds, the little gods carrying on their immemorial duties under the noses of the theology. Ordinary Egypt, it appears, quietly declined to give up its household protectors, its mourned and risen Osiris, its hope of the West. When Akhenaten died, after 17 years, the revolution died with him. His young successor, a boy first named Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten, changed his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, and the world knows the rest of that name for other reasons. The court returned to Thebes, the temples reopened, the gods came back like a tide, and then Egypt did to Akhenaten what he had done to the gods. His city was abandoned to the sand, his temples dismantled block by block, his name hacked from the monuments and struck from the king lists. Later ages, when they had to refer to him at all, wrote only the criminal of Akhenaten. The pharaoh who erased the gods was erased in his turn, so thoroughly that his very existence was forgotten for 3,000 years, until modern archaeology raised his ghost city from the desert and his strange face from the rubble. The episode remains one of history's great might-have-beens, and one of its great parables. The one man in the ancient world with absolute power over religion tried to simplify the divine to a single point of light, and the divine, as Egypt understood it, would not simplify. The people wanted their stories back. The widow searching the riverbanks, the child hidden in the reeds, the scales and the feather, the grinning dwarf at the bedside. Light alone, however beautiful, was not enough. Egypt required love, grief, justice, and resurrection required. That is, its myths, and within a generation the great river of the old religion had closed over the heresy as the Nile closes over a thrown stone, and flowed on, barely rippled, toward its next 15 centuries. Not all of Egypt's myth lived in temples and tombs. Some of it lived where stories have always best lived, by the fire in the evening, in the shade of the threshing floor, on the deck of a boat waiting for wind. And Egypt, blessedly, wrote some of these down. On papyri copied by scribes and schoolboys survive actual tales, fictions, entertainments, wonder stories, in which the gods and their magic wander freely through the lives of made-up people, and they show us the myths at play, relaxed, funny, homely, strange. Let us hear two of the best, as the night grows deep, the way Egyptians heard them. The first is the tale of the two brothers, part folk story, part myth in disguise, and one of the oldest recorded stories in the world, with a plot we would recognize as a story. Two brothers lived together, Anubis the elder, with his house and wife, and young Beta, strong and innocent, who served him faithfully, a wonder worker without knowing it, who understood the speech of cattle. And the elder brother's wife, watching the young man's strength, desired him, and when he refused her in horror, she feared exposure, and accused him to her husband of the very thing she had attempted. The elder brother waited behind the stable door with his spear. But as Bata drove the cattle home, the lead cow spoke to him, "Your brother stands behind the door with his spear." And the second cow said the same, and he looked and saw the feet and fled, the elder brother in murderous pursuit, until the sun god Ra, looking down on injustice, drew between them a river full of crocodiles. Across the water at dawn, Bata called out the truth, and proved his innocence by a terrible oath and wound, and departed heartbroken into exile, telling his brother a secret. He would place his heart in the top of a great cedar tree, and if ever the tree were cut down and his heart fell, the beer in his brother's cup would froth and trouble itself, and by that sign come and find me, and seek my heart. Though it take 7 years, place it in cool water, and I shall live. The tale runs on through wonders. The gods, pitying Bata's loneliness, make him a wife of divine beauty. She is coveted and stolen by Pharaoh himself. The cedar is treacherously felled, and the far-off heart falls, and Bata drops dead among his cattle. The beer froths in the elder brother's cup, and the elder brother, the once deceived, once murderous brother, takes up his staff and searches years for the fallen heart, finds it at last, shriveled like a berry, sets it in cool water through the night, and as it drinks, the dead man's body shudders, and the heart returns to its breast, and the brothers embrace. Bata then passes through transformation after transformation. A magnificent bull, a pair of Persia trees, a splinter that flies into the unfaithful wife's mouth, until at last he is reborn as the son of Pharaoh, and rises to the throne, and judges his betrayer, and reigns 30 years, and his faithful elder brother reigns after him. Under the folktale sparkle, every deep Egyptian theme is at work. The heart kept outside the body, death undone by patient searching in cool water, innocence vindicated before the gods, the soul's transformations, bull and tree and seed and king, and, closest to the great myth of all, the beloved dead brought back because someone would not stop looking. Isis would have understood every step of that story. Egypt's fireside tales and Egypt's scriptures are one family. The second tale is smaller and stranger and perfect. The Shipwrecked Sailor. The oldest surviving story of a castaway, told by the sailor himself. He was bound for the mines, he says, in a great ship with a picked crew who knew sky and water, and a wave of 8 cubits rose, and the ship died, and of all aboard the sea gave back only him, cast up on an island alone. 3 days he lay in the shelter of a bush, with only his heart for a companion. Then he found the island unbelievable. Figs and grapes, vegetables and grain, fish and fowl, everything that exists was upon it, and he ate and made a fire and offered a burnt offering to the gods. And then the world thundered. The trees shook, the ground quaked, and there came upon him a serpent 30 cubits long, his body overlaid with gold, his brows of true lapis lazuli, a god, bearded like a king. The serpent raised the little man in his mouth, carried him unharmed to his dwelling place, set him down and asked, 3 times as gods ask, "Who brought you here, little one?" And when the sailor had stammered out his shipwreck, the serpent comforted him. "Fear not, God has let you live and brought you to this island of the spirit, where nothing is lacking. You shall pass 4 months here. Then a ship of your own land shall come, and you shall go home, and embrace your children, and be buried in your own tomb, which is, to an Egyptian, the fullness of blessing." And then the golden serpent told his own grief. He had dwelt there with his kindred, 75 serpents in all, and a star fell, and fire consumed them every one while he was not among them, and he wished himself dead, finding himself alone amid the bodies. "If you are brave," said the survivor of that fire to the survivor of the wave, "and master your heart, you shall yet embrace your children and kiss your wife and see your home, and that is better than all things." The ship came, as promised. The serpent loaded the sailor with gifts, myrrh and incense, ivory and baboons, and told him, as the shore receded, the island itself would sink beneath the waves and never be found again. It is a tale about consolation offered across an unbridgeable difference. One bereaved immortal telling one drenched mortal that endurance is possible and homecoming is real, and its wisdom is the Nile water wisdom of all Egyptian storytelling. The wave takes the ship, the fire takes the kindred, and still the heart, mastered, sails home. Master your heart, little sailor. The island sinks, the story keeps. One more tale, a later one, from the last centuries of the old religion, when the pyramids were already more ancient to the storytellers than the storytellers are to us. And it is Egypt's own ghost story, told among the very tombs we have been wandering all night. It concerns a prince who wanted to read what no man should read, the tale of Setna and the Book of Thoth. Egypt, the civilization of sacred writing, here tells a story about the danger of the ultimate text. A warning label written by scribes, about scribes, for anyone who believes knowledge has no price. Setna was a king's son and a great scholar of the old writings, who haunted the ancient cemeteries reading the tombs, and he learnt that somewhere beneath Memphis, in the tomb of a long-dead magician named Nenefer-Kapta, lay the Book of Thoth itself, written by the god's own hand, 2 spells only, but such spells. The first enchants heaven, earth, the deep, the mountains and the seas, and lets the reader understand the speech of every bird and beast and creeping thing. The second lets a man, even in the tomb, see Ra shining in the sky with all his gods, the moon rising and the stars in their true forms. Setna found the tomb and went down into it, and the dead were at home. The magician's spirit sat upright in the darkness, and beside him the spirits of his wife and little son, and between them, on the floor, the book gave light like the sun, and before Setna could touch it, the dead wife spoke, "Do not take it." And she told him how it had been won, and what it had cost, how her husband had learned of the book, hidden in the middle of the river at Koptos inside a nest of boxes, an iron box, and in it a box of bronze, and one of juniper wood, and of ebony and ivory, and of silver, and last of gold, and in the gold box the book, the whole guarded by serpents and scorpions, and by one deathless snake coiled around it. How he fought the deathless serpent, which came alive each time it was slain, until he killed it a third time and cut it in two, and put sand between the halves. How he read the two spells and enchanted heaven and earth, and how Thoth, robbed, went before Ra and demanded judgment, and the sentence came down. The magician's little son fell from the boat and drowned, and his wife drowned after him, and the magician, having buried them, bound the book to his own body and went into the river last of all. "That is the book you are asking for," said the dead woman across her lamplit tomb. "It cost us the earth." Take warning, Setna took the book. He had come armed with spells and pride, and he played a game of drafts with the dead magician for it, and lost, game after game, being hammered down into the floor of the tomb to his knees, to his waist, and cheated at the last, snatching the book by a trick of magic, and fleeing up into the daylight while the dead man's voice followed him, calm as fate, promising he would bring it back yet, with a forked stick in his hand and a lighted brazier on his head. And what followed, Setna experienced as a waking dream of ruin, a beautiful stranger who demanded, as the price of her love, his goods, then his estate, then things dearer still, until he consented to horrors and woke screaming in the street, a hallucination, a moral haunting, sent to teach him in vision what the dead family had learned in fact, what a man will lose who must have the ultimate thing. Setna woke shattered, and did not argue with heaven twice. He carried the Book of Thoth back down into the lamplit tomb, with a forked stick in his hand and a brazier of fire on his head, exactly as the dead man had foretold, and the magician's spirit laughed, not unkindly, to see prophecy keep its appointment. And Setna made amends. He journeyed south at the dead man's asking, and found the graves of the drowned wife and child, and brought their mummies north, and reunited the little family in one tomb forever, and sealed it, with the book shining between them where it belonged, among the dead who alone can afford it. The scribes who wrote this down lived by the conviction that writing was divine, and precisely because they believed it, they told a story in which the holiest book in the world is a lamp in a tomb that the living must learn to leave where it lies. Even Egypt, especially Egypt, knew that some doors are lit from the other side. Before we leave the fireside, let us listen a little longer, not to tales this time, but to voices, the songs and sayings of the Egyptians themselves, preserved on papyrus and potsherd, in which this ancient people speaks to us not about gods and kings, but about the heart. For no ancient civilization has left us more of its inner music, its love songs, its proverbs, its meditations on how to live, and nothing brings the world of the myths closer than hearing the people who believed them fall in love, give advice, and wonder aloud about happiness. The love poetry first, because it surprises everyone who meets it. From the villages and the schools of the later empire survive whole cycles of love songs, young voices, girls as often as boys, singing of longing with a freshness that 3,000 years have not faded. The lovers call each other brother and sister, the Egyptian idiom of tenderness. They scheme to pass each other's houses. They fall artfully ill so the beloved will visit. They envy the wind that touches the other's face. One girl sings that her heart flutters like a bird when she thinks of her love, and that she cannot braid her hair or keep her dress straight for thinking of him. One boy declares he will lie down inside the door in the rain all night, if only he may hear his sister's footstep. The songs are full of the river world we have travelled all night. Lovers meet among the reeds, swim the channel with the crocodile ignored for love's sake, sit in gardens where the pomegranate tree gossips about what it has seen, and the goddess over all of it is our golden one, Hathor, to whom the young pray for luck in love as naturally as breathing. Read them at midnight, 3 millennia later, and the distance simply is not there. The human heart, it turns out, has always sounded exactly like this. Then the wisdom, for Egypt was the ancient world's great teacher of how to live, and its instruction texts were copied by schoolboys for 2,000 years and travelled far beyond its borders. The sages speak in a voice of unhurried, riverine calm. "Do not set your heart on wealth," says one, "for no one knows the day when it goes. Yesterday's riches are today's wind. Be silent," they counsel. When the angry man rages, silence is stronger. The hot-mouthed man is like a tree grown in the open, quickly stripped, while the truly silent man is like a tree grown in a garden that flourishes and doubles its fruit and stands before its Lord in peace. Feed the guest. Do not mock the blind or the dwarf. Do not move the boundary stones of the widow. Remember that man is clay and straw, and God is his builder. The greatest of the sages tell the scribe not to be proud of his learning, but to take counsel with the ignorant as well as the wise. For the limit of skill has never been reached, and good speech is more hidden than the greenstone, yet may be found among the maidservants at the grindstones. Hear the feather of Mart inside every sentence. Wisdom, in Egypt, was not cleverness but attunement, living level with the balance, keeping one's own small pan even with truth, and sometimes the voices lift into pure meditation. And then Egypt speaks lines that belong to the whole human race. The harpers painted on tomb walls sing over the banquets of the living. Bodies pass away since the time of the god, and generations come in their place. The gods who were aforetime rest in their pyramids, and none comes back from there to tell us how they fare. So, sings the harper, and here the melody turns, exactly on the pivot where Egypt always turned. Follow your heart while you live. Put myrrh on your head, dress in fine linen, make holiday, and do not weary of it. For no one can take his goods with him, and no one who has gone returns. Later singers answered indignantly that the West is a land of light, and the dead live there in peace. And the two songs went on being sung at the same feasts, sorrow and assurance in counterpoint, which is perhaps the most honest liturgy any civilization has devised. One ancient poem even records a man debating with his own soul whether life's suffering is worth enduring, and his soul answers him at last, not with doctrine, but with kindness. Stay with me, love life, and I will remain with you. We will make harbour together. Across 4,000 years, that is still counsel worth hearing at the low hour of any night. The oldest voices we possess, singing that hearts flutter, that silence is a garden tree, that the feast is worth attending, and that the soul, patient beside us in the dark, means to see us home. Before our night begins its long turn toward home, let us step back and look at a pattern, one we have brushed against a dozen times without naming, though it structures everything. The Egyptian passion for duality. Egypt did not see its world as one thing, it saw it, always and everywhere, as two things held in balance, and in that habit of vision lies perhaps the deepest secret of how this mythology thinks. Begin with the land itself, because Egypt always did. The country was never simply Egypt. It was the two lands, Upper Egypt, the long narrow valley of the south, and Lower Egypt, the broad green fan of the delta. Two countries in the deep past, joined at the dawn of history by the first kings, and kept ceremonially two forever after. Each had its crown, the tall white crown of the south, the flaring red crown of the north, and the pharaoh wore them combined, the double crown, two in one upon a single brow. Each had its goddess, the vulture of the south, the cobra of the north, and both rode together over the king's face. Each its plant, lotus and papyrus, which the gods are shown binding together around the hieroglyph of union. Two lungs, one breath. The king's most ancient title was simply Lord of the Two Lands. His coronation was, every time, a reuniting, and a chief rite of the accession was driving the ceremonial circuit around the walls, binding the two into one by the king's own moving body. Egypt could have forgotten its prehistoric division in a generation. Instead, it enshrined the division forever, precisely in order to celebrate, forever, the joining. Unity, Egypt believed, is not the absence of two-ness, it is two-ness held. And once you see the pattern, it is everywhere. The black land and the red land, the living soil and the desert, meeting at that knife edge where a man can stand with one foot in the sown and one in the waste. East bank and west bank, sunrise side and sunset side, the shore of the living and the shore of the dead, stitched together daily by every ferry on the river, day and night, the sky road and the duat, Ra's two boats, one for morning, one for evening. Horus and Set themselves, for beneath the great quarrel we followed to its verdict, there lies an older and stranger image the Egyptians never abandoned. The two gods reconciled, jointly crowning the king, jointly binding the lotus and papyrus, even fused in a few astonishing pictures into a single body with two heads, falcon and storm beast on one neck. The king's titles made him heir of both. The two lords, Horus and Set, are at peace in him, the texts say. Set, chaos, the desert, the storm. Egypt's deepest thought did not dream of abolishing him. Abolish the desert and you have no border for the sown. Abolish the night and the sun has no victory. Abolish Set and who stands at the prow when the serpent rises. The goal was never the destruction of the dark twin. It was balance. The two pans of the scale, level. Mart, after all, is weighed, not enthroned alone. Hold this beside the other mythologies humankind has told, and Egypt's temper stands clear. Many traditions dream of a final battle, a last day when the dark is destroyed forever and only light remains. Egypt dreamed of no such day, or rather, when its texts do glance at an end of things, it is not a triumph but a dissolution, the waters closing back over all, from which, one suspects, a mound would rise again. The Egyptian cosmos is not a war to be won. It is a rhythm to be kept. Flood and ebb, day and night, death and rising, black land and red, forever. Nothing is finished once and finally. The sun's victory lasts one day exactly, the flood's gift 1 year, the king's mart 1 reign, and each must be renewed, and can be renewed, world without end. It is a vision without apocalypse and without despair. The two usually travel together, and its emblem is not a sword or a throne but the pair. The double crown, the 2 banks, the twin shrines, the 2 brothers at peace in one body, the 2 pans of one balance trembling level around a feather. 1 in 2, 2 in 1, and the river running, patient and punctual, between. Every story we have told tonight was told for 3,000 years. And then, slowly, gently, like a lamp running out of oil in a great quiet house, the telling stopped. The twilight of the Egyptian gods is one of the longest sunsets in the history of religion, and it deserves to be watched with the same unhurried attention we have given the dawn. For the gods of Egypt did not fall in a day, and some of them, in their going, walked farther across the world than they ever had in their glory. The last great age of the old religion came, strangely enough, under foreign kings. When Alexander's general Ptolemy took Egypt for his own, he and his Greek descendants ruled it for 3 centuries, and they ruled it, shrewdly and sincerely, as pharaohs. The Ptolemies wore the double crown. They were carved on temple walls in Egyptian dress, smiting enemies, offering mart to the gods, and they built magnificently. Many of the temples a traveller sees in Egypt today, Dendera of Hathor, Edfu of Horus, Kom Ombo of Sobek, the island shrine of Philae, are not from the age of the pyramids at all, but from this Greek-ruled Indian summer, when the ancient rites were performed with scrupulous perfection by priesthoods richer in written learning than ever before. The old religion, sensing perhaps its own age, spent those centuries writing everything down. The temple walls of the late age are dense beyond all earlier custom, covered floor to ceiling in ritual, myth, hymn, and inventory, as if the priests were packing a civilization's memory into stone against a long journey. And while the temples deepened at home, one goddess set out across the sea. Isis, the searcher, the mourner, the mother of the marshes, became, in the last centuries before the Common Era, the most widely worshipped deity of the Mediterranean world. Greek and Roman sailors carried her, merchants built her shrines in port after port. Her festival of the launching of the ships opened the sailing season across the sea. She had temples in Athens and Pompeii, in Spain and Gaul, along the Danube and the Rhine. A sanctuary of Isis stood in Roman London, at the edge of the known world, where legionaries and freed women in the northern reign prayed to the Lady of the Nile. Her mysteries initiated seekers by night with lamps and visions. Her processions filled Roman streets with sistrum shimmer, and her image, the great goddess enthroned, the divine child Horus on her lap, nursing, became one of the most familiar holy pictures in the ancient world. When a new faith rose, and the image of another mother and child spread through the same cities, along the same roads, it found the eyes of the Mediterranean long schooled in tenderness toward exactly that scene. The old goddess did not so much vanish as hand something on, but the tide was going out. The new faith rose, the emperors changed religion, then changed the laws. The temple endowments were withdrawn, the priesthoods thinned, the festivals faded from the calendars. In the year 394 of the Common Era, on the island of Philae, the last working temple of the old religion, far in the south, where the Nile enters Egypt, a priest named Nesmet-Arachim carved a graffito beside a figure of the god Mandalus, the last dated hieroglyphic inscription ever written. After more than 3,500 years, the words of the gods fell silent, though the island's priests, protected by treaties with the desert tribes who still revered Isis, kept her rites alive for generations more, the last small flame of the oldest religion on earth, burning on its island while the world changed around it. In the 6th century, by imperial order, the temple of Isis at Philae was closed at last. The statues were carried away, and the longest continuous religious tradition in human history came, quietly, to its end. The gods of Egypt had watched the pyramids rise, had received the prayers of 100 generations, had outlasted every empire that conquered them. And now the doors were sealed, the offerings ceased, and the sand began its slow work on the thresholds. Nut still arched over the valley every night, strung with stars. The river still rose in its season, but no priest on any roof kept the hours, and no one alive could read what the walls were saying. And yet, you have noticed it already, for you are proof of it. The story does not end in silence. You know these gods. Before tonight ever began, you knew the jackal's head and the falcon's eye, the scales and the feather, the mother nursing the divine child, the golden mask of a boy king. The gods of Egypt enjoy, at this moment, a strange and vigorous afterlife. They are among the most recognized images on earth, adored by children, studied by scholars, borrowed by every art. How the sealed doors opened again is the last chapter of the mythology, and it is a resurrection story, which is exactly as it should be. For 13 centuries the old religion slept almost without dreams. Europe knew Egypt only through Greek travelers' tales and scripture. The hieroglyphs were believed to be pure mystic symbols, unreadable riddles. The pyramids were explained as granaries or wonders of vanished giants. Egypt itself lived its new lives, Christian and then Muslim, among monuments it honored as marvels without memory. And then, we told this tale at our journey's beginning, and now we can feel its full weight. The stone was found at Rosetta, and Champollion, after years at the edge of obsession, stood holding the key, and the words of the gods began, one wall at a time, to speak again. What followed was one of the great awakenings in the history of knowledge. The pyramid texts rose out of their chambers, the Book of the Dead unrolled, the love songs and the lawsuits, the hymns and the shopping lists, 3.5 millennia of a civilization's voice, returned to the hearing of the world. Archaeology gave the voice its faces. The temples were dug from the sand, the tombs opened, the golden mask of Tutankhamun lifted into the light of a century that put his face on the front pages of every nation. The gods of Egypt woke to find themselves famous, and they went to work again, in the way gods work in an age like ours, through story and image. Every museum with an Egyptian hall knows the crowds that gather nowhere else in the building. Every generation of children discovers Anubis and the mummy's mystery with the same shiver of delight. The old images flowed into new vessels, novels and films, operas and video games, the art of every continent, sometimes garbled, often reinvented, always alive. Scholars, meanwhile, have restored the deeper gifts. We can now read the negative confession and hear, 4,000 years back, a civilization declaring that eternity cares whether you made anyone weep. We can trace in the cult of Isis the ancient schooling of the world's eye, in the image of the mother and child. We can follow the feather of Mart forward into every scale of justice that stands today outside every courthouse on earth. For the balance held by blindfolded justice in our public squares is the direct descendant of the balance in the Hall of Two Truths, the heart and the feather translated into the law's own emblem. The solar calendar that orders your year is Egypt's, passed through Rome. The very word for the Black Land's chemistry, the art of Kemet, alchemia, alchemy, chemistry, carries Egypt's old name inside it like a heart in a wrapped body. But the deepest legacy is not any single borrowing. It is a temper, a way of facing the largest things that still reaches us across the whole distance. Egypt is the civilization that looked longest and most steadily at death, and refused to look away, and came back from the looking with green fields. It insisted that love outlasts the body, that the searcher finds the pieces, that mourning is holy work, that the beloved dead remain in the family. It insisted that the universe is moral, that truth weighs, that kindness counts, that the humblest life will be taken seriously forever. And it insisted that nothing good is kept without keeping. The sun must be sailed, the feather must be offered, the order must be renewed each morning, and can be, whenever human beings have hoped, against the evidence of the grave, that what is scattered can be gathered, and what is not lost forever. They have hoped in the pattern Egypt cut, first and deepest. The doors of the temples are open again, differently, as museums and books and nights like this one. And the offering that keeps these gods alive now is attention. The story told again, the names spoken again. A person lives, said Egypt, as long as their name is spoken. Osiris, Isis, Horus, Thoth, Hathor, Anubis, Ra. Tonight, once more, the names have been spoken. And somewhere in the deep grammar of the world, the boat sails on. Our boat is far down the river now, and the east will not stay dark forever. So let us draw together, as the current slows, the deepest things this mythology has been saying all night beneath its stories, the handful of great themes that make the myths of Egypt not merely old but wise. The first is this: order is a practice, not a possession. The world, Egypt said, is an island of light in an ocean of chaos that never goes away, and the island is kept by the sun sailed nightly past the serpent, by the king offering mart, by the farmer honest at the water channel, by every person choosing, hour by hour, not to add weight to the wrong pan of the scale. Nothing is won once. Everything must be renewed, and everything can be. It is a demanding vision, and an immensely hopeful one. Tomorrow's sunrise is not guaranteed, but it is achievable, and you are on the crew. The second: death is a road, not a wall. Egypt made the boldest reply to mortality any civilization has offered. Not denial, for no people dwelt more attentively on death. Not despair, for none furnished it more richly with hope, but transformation. Death as a journey with a geography, a jurisprudence, and a homecoming. The tomb was a doorway, the mummy an anchor, the West a neighborhood. Whatever one believes about what waits, there is medicine in the Egyptian posture itself. To face the largest fear with maps and lamps and company, and to imagine, on the far side of the scales, not strangeness but the fields of home. The third: love is stronger than dismemberment. At the center of the whole mythology stands not a warrior, but a widow. A woman searching riverbanks for the pieces of what she loved, refusing every verdict of impossibility. Isis is Egypt's deepest answer to Set. The scattered can be gathered, the mourned can be mended. Faithfulness, patient and cunning and unresting, out-endures brute force. Every funeral in Egypt for 3,000 years was that answer performed. Every springtime of the grain confirmed it. The fourth: justice reaches all the way down and all the way up. The feather is weighed against every heart, the pharaohs too. Kings bowed to Mart, gods lived on her. The poorest soul in the Hall of Two Truths was tried by the same balance as the greatest. Egypt planted, deep in the human record, the idea that power does not exempt and obscurity does not exclude, that the moral order is the real order of the world, sovereign even over the sovereign. And the fifth, the quietest: the sacred is at home in the ordinary. The divine, in Egypt, was not exiled to the far side of the sky. It padded through the house as a cat, grinned from the headrest, coiled in the granary, rose in the bread and the beer. It was the river's mood and the star's appointment, the midwife's ally and the schoolboy's patron. A civilization that finds gods in its kitchen and its reeds is a civilization that has decided the world is worth loving all the way through. And that decision, more than any temple, may be Egypt's masterpiece. And so, before the last quiet begins, let us gather the whole night into one slow retelling. The entire story, told once through, the way the river gathers all its waters into one current at the end. In the beginning there was only none, the dark and shoreless sea. And out of the waters rose the first mound, and on it the first light woke and knew itself. Atom, Ra, the self-created. And from the one came two, air and moisture, and from two came earth and sky, Geb resting and Nut arched glittering above him. And from earth and sky came the great children, Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys. The sun took his boat and began the voyage he has never ceased. Across the sky by day, through the Duat by night, past the coils of Apophis, reborn every morning as the scarab rolls the new sun up the sky. His eye wept, and from the tears came humankind. Humankind rebelled, and the lioness was loosed and then gentled with a lake of beer-turned blood, and the weary sun withdrew to heaven on the back of the sky cow, leaving the world to kings and to Mart, the feather of truth by which all things are weighed. Osiris the good king taught the world the grain and the vine and the law, and was loved, and his brother Set built a chest of cedar and gold, and the trusting king lay down in it, and the lid came down, and the river carried him away. Isis cut her hair and walked into the world searching. She found him in the pillar of a foreign palace and brought him home, and Set found him again and tore him into 14 pieces and scattered him the length of Egypt, and Isis began again. Piece by piece, in her papyrus boat, with Nephthys mourning beside her and Anubis waiting with the linen, she gathered her husband, and the first mummy was wrapped, and the kite hovered on beating wings, and breath came back just far enough, and Horus was conceived at the border of death, and Osiris went down to be king of the West forever. In the marshes the child grew hidden, stung, healed, guarded by a mother who once halted the very sun for him, and rose at last to claim the throne. 80 years the falcon and the storm contended, in courtrooms and rivers, with tricks and wounds. The eye was torn and made whole again, the wedget, sign of all healing, and the tribunal of the gods ruled at last for the sun, justice over strength. Horus took his father's throne, and Set, unbroken, was set at the prow of the sunboat, his violence given at last its right work, harpooning chaos on behalf of the light. And because the god had died and been gathered and lived, the road was open. Every soul that died in Egypt walked it. Through the tent of purification and the 70 days, the opening of the mouth at the tomb door, the descent into the gated dark with a scroll of passwords, and at the road's end, the hall of two truths, the heart in one pan, the feather in the other, Thoth watching with lifted pen, the devourer waiting, patient, in vain if the life had been just. True of voice, said the verdict, and the gate opened on the field of reeds. Home, perfected. The flood always kind, the barley tall, the beloved dead waiting on the green banks of forever. Around this great spine the whole world of Egypt turned, Thoth counting the moon, and winning 5 days at drafts so the gods could be born. Hathor, golden with music and beer, the lioness asleep inside the dancer, Isis learning the sun's own name by patience and audacity, Bes grinning demons away from the cradle, Tawret standing fierce at the birth brick, Happy swelling the river, Sobek gleaming in the shallows, Khnum at his wheel shaping every child of clay, the pharaoh, Horus alive, offering the feather to heaven, the temples breathing their daily rhythm of washing and clothing and feeding the gods, the festivals pouring gold and music onto the river, the healers speaking the story of the poisoned child over every fevered bed, because the story was the cure. Once, a king tried to trade the whole crowded, loving cosmos for a single disk of light, and Egypt quietly refused, and the river closed over the heresy. And when at last the long twilight came, the Greek kings, the goddess sailing to Rome and London, the final hieroglyph carved on the island of Philae, the doors sealed, the gods did what their own myth had always promised. They waited in the dark, gathered piece by searchers with lamps and stubbornness, until the stone from Rosetta opened their mouths, and the names were spoken again, and they rose. That is the story entire. The longest-running dream humankind has ever dreamed, 3,500 years from the first spell in the pyramid dark, to the last priest's farewell at Philae, and alive again tonight in the telling. Out of the waters, a mound, out of the mound, light, out of the light, love and struggle and justice, out of death, gathering, out of gathering, mourning. Egypt said it every day for 3 millennia, and it has said it once more, to you, tonight. And now the story is told, and there is nothing left to do, and nothing left to keep track of. The river has us. Let the boat drift. Feel how quiet the night has become. The last villages are dark on either bank. The palms stand without a breath of wind. The water under the hull is so smooth that the stars lie on it unbroken. Nut's whole glittering body doubled in the river. Stars above you, and stars beneath you, and the boat suspended gently between two skies. You may let your eyes rest now. Close them, if they wish to close. There is nowhere to arrive tonight, and no hour to keep. The current knows the way, as it has known it for 1,000,000 years. Let your body grow heavy, the way the moored boats are heavy on the evening water. Let your shoulders drop, and your hands soften, and your breath find the slow rhythm of the river. In, like the flood arriving without hurry. Out, like the waters withdrawing, leaving the fields fed. In, and out. The whole of Egypt breathed this way, year upon year, rise and fall, and was at peace with it. And you may breathe this way too, and be at peace with it, for as long as you like. The images of the night can pass by now like the dark banks. You do not need to hold them. The first mound rising from the waters, the boat of the sun, lamplit, sailing the dark beneath the world, entirely unafraid, the kite hovering on soft wings over the sleeping god, the child asleep in the reeds, guarded, the feather, lying in its golden pan, weightless, sufficient. The green fields on the western shore, where the reeds bend over the water, and everyone who ever crossed is home. Let each image come, and glow a moment, and go. The river carries them. The river carries everything, and drops nothing, and forgets nothing, and hurries nowhere. And if sleep is rising in you now, let it rise. It is the flood. It comes gently, and it feeds everything. The Egyptians would tell you that sleep is a little crossing, made nightly, with a faithful return at dawn, that you have made it 10,000 times and the morning has never once failed to find you, and that the sun, even now, is sailing the hidden river on your behalf, with the strongest of the gods standing guard at the prow, so that the light will be there, punctual and newborn, when you need it again. Nothing is required of you. The watch is kept, the boat is sailed, the names have been spoken, and the story is safe. So rest now, traveller. Egypt has been keeping this peace for 5,000 years, and tonight it is yours. If, some other evening, you wish to drift down other rivers and through other ages, the channel will be here, and new journeys with it. And if tonight's journey brought you rest, you might, tomorrow, in the daylight, leave a word below to say where in the world you slept. But that is for tomorrow. Tonight there is only the river, and the stars on the water, and the slow current bearing you toward morning. The east will take care of the dawn. The scarab is already rolling the new sun softly toward the rim of the world. You have nothing to do but drift, and breathe, and let go. Sleep well, traveller. Good night.